Chapter 16. The Tower of Evil Beckons. Half an hour later, we were standing on top of the hillock where the Warlock's tower used to be. I hadn't really expected finding anything up on top, but seeing as how I was only really looking for civilization the first time I was up there, I decided that we ought to take a look anyway, and use the time to scout out the surroundings for any threats. I didn't learn anything useful about the tower except that I could tell that some of the weed-covered stones had been scorched. The kill him with fire part of the story still looked to hold up to scrutiny. Circling around the hill, we approached the riverside, and so far, what I'd spotted in the bar held true. There actually was a smallish cave leading into the hillock. Trying to forget today's other cave experiences, I slowly entered, and could see that the cave really wasn't that deep, 15 meters or so, and the weak light illuminating the cave allowed me to enter without any light sources and still be able to see my way. I took my time, trying to avoid any stupid interactions with old traps, resident vampire bats, or whatever else exogenics might feel I needed in my life at that moment. But there was nothing to spot at all. When I made it to the back of the cave, however, I learned exactly why the Warlock hadn't escaped to wreak havoc on the village. The earthen passage with wooden crossbeams had collapsed, probably as a result of the tower coming down, with a huge boulder exploding its way straight through the roof of the passage, almost completely blocking the passage. Tricky part here, however, was the word almost. I asked Lyle to keep watch at the cave entrance and make sure that we wouldn't be ambushed, and lit one of my precious torches in order to see what I was doing. I had instantly assumed that the collapse of the tunnel had been complete. Scrutinizing the former tunnel, however, I could see that a low-hanging passage still remained open under the threatening boulder. It seemed to be almost impassable by a grown human, but almost was good enough for me to give it a try. Being a half-elf with strength and endurance as dump stats had gifted me with a slender build, which might just be my meal ticket allowing for entry to the remains of the Warlock's tower. 2 minutes of crawling, pushing, and squirming disallowed me of that notion, yet I was this close. With Lyle pushing on my legs, I had made it a full 2 meters into the claustrophobic passage, and I could tell that the passage actually seemed to open up just a bit further in. There was just no way to inch my way any further, and Lyle had no way of applying more pressure. I went so far as to ask Lyle whether he could dig the passage any deeper, but he insisted that there could be a real danger of bringing the entire hill down on our heads. I walked around the cave, kicking up dust and working myself into a state of annoyance. I wasn't interested in involving anybody else from the village in my quest. Who knew what I'd be able to find for myself if only I could make it through? I went through a lot of increasingly improbable solutions before I came up with a horrible idea that I instantly knew I was going to try out. I let Lyle in on my plan, and he told me in no uncertain terms that it rated among the worst ideas that he'd ever heard about, and that he was very anxious to see me try to go through with it. If nothing else, he said, the story would earn him any number of rounds at the tavern. I tried to ignore how anxious my sidekick was to see my imminent failure and focus on the task before me. The challenge was not only to be able to force my way into the tunnel, but to be able to continue all the way into the opening beyond without becoming stuck. If I were able to make it in there, I had no doubt that I'd be able to make it back, or at the very least investigate the space beyond, slide all the loot out to Lyle, and die a horrible death before respawning back in the village. With that thought firmly fixed in my mind, not the horrible death part, the loot part, I took a deep breath and asked Lyle to take the torch, step back a couple of meters, and wait until I yelled for his assistance. I then proceeded to take off my clothes. Well, obviously I didn't go 100% au naturel. Risking my life was one thing, but there are certain parts you just don't put into harm's way. Thus, heroically clad in my skivvies, I placed all my stuff to the side of the tunnel, located my potion of grease, and threw the potion into the tunnel as hard as I could. I was rewarded by a splattering sound, and a small wave of viscous, slippery liquid sailed forth from the tunnel, covering the area right in front of the tunnel and a couple of meters outwards. I checked the consistency of the oily substance that now covered the surface and smiled. What used to be a rough cave surface with equal parts dirt and stone now felt like a slip-and-slide. I hurried back to the cave entrance, took a deep breath, and started sprinting for the tunnel opening. Where the grease coating started, I threw myself towards the cavern floor, gathering my hands in front of me as if diving into a pool, and aimed for the opening, which suddenly seemed like it had halved in size. This was definitely another new experience for me, like being shot from a cannon, praying for my life, yet without any possibility of correcting my aim. Split seconds later, something struck me. Well, several somethings. First, the tunnel walls pushing in on my body from all sides. Next, shards and splinters from the vial, closely followed by the huge boulder which carved deep furrows into my right shoulder and side, and last but not least, the clay wall I hit head first when I came barreling through the room at unhealthy speeds. To this day, I remain impressed I didn't break my fool neck. I did, however, spend some time on the floor groaning and cursing myself, and would probably have stayed that way for a while longer when I was rudely interrupted by the arrival of my backpack, which bruised a new couple of places on my battered body. From the other side of the tunnel, Lyle shouted, "What can you see? That potion of grease isn't going to last forever." I staggered to my feet, and off to the side extracted another torch from my pack and lit it, taking great care to keep it at a safe distance from myself. Covered in grease like I was, it'd be only too easy to end up a half-elven torch. The torch illuminated my surroundings, and I found myself in a dank cellar room accompanied by a wine rack, a wooden box, and a skeleton. The skeleton was surrounded by empty wine bottles, and I would have loved to spend some time investigating the room, but as Lyle reminded me, I was operating on a timer here. I had no clue when the grease would disappear, leaving me trapped inside to join the other skeleton. In short succession, I stripped the corpse of 2 rings, a necklace, a purse, and a book, moved on to the box, which had at some point been an ice box, but after the ice had evaporated, most of the contents had rotted away long ago. I grabbed the remaining items without bothering to see what they were, and moved on to the wine racks, quickly stuffing everything in my backpack. A short while later, I slid the backpack back out the tunnel and prepared a repeat performance of my earlier stunt. And I almost made it all the way through. With a little help from Lyle, a bit of wiggling, and a few extra scrapes and injuries, I returned to the other side to a madly grinning Lyle. We agreed to walk back to the village, turn in our quests and receive our rewards, and meet right after at the Warlock's End to lick our wounds and share the plunder. Just before we reached the palisade, however, we heard 2 angry voices, raised in anger, and came upon Ethel and Sourpuss in a heated argument. The sight could have been unintentionally comical. The brawny catfolk was half again higher than the ratling, and he had to bend almost in half to face off the way they did. But the furious look on his face rapidly dispersed all humor from the situation. We barely managed to hear the last snippet Sourpuss spat at Ethel.
"Just do your damn job, you little gutter shite! It's your fault, and you damn well know it!"
Following that, he immediately strode off, and we watched as Ethel stood there, glaring holes into his back. I told Lyle I'd meet him back in the village, and walked over to Ethel, taking care to make a lot of noise. "Wow, Ethel, what in the pits was that about? I thought you 2 had made up yesterday." He turned around, large ears drooping slightly.
"Hey, Archie. Yeah, that's what I thought too. I'm not really sure what that was. All of a sudden, he just accused me of not doing my job guarding the village. Then when I asked him which enemies I should be protecting it from, he mentioned some bloody cats. That's something for the damn hunter to deal with, right? Of course, when I told him that, he went completely off his catnip."
I nodded and scratched my nose. "You know, Ethel, Lyle and I actually took care of those feral cats today. Want me to have a word with him? Smooth things over a bit?" Athel spat and shook his head.
Pff. He can go to the pits for all I care. That God's damned volatile drunkard. Probably just had a bad hangover. As usual.
I patted his back in commiseration, and he accompanied me on my way back to the village, chatting merrily, as if he'd already forgotten what just happened. I went to turn in my quest with Sourpuss, mentioning nothing about what I'd seen, and after that short visit to Sourpuss, my mood had improved markedly. I walked happy, with just a slight limp, and whistling back to the tavern. A short while later, Lyle and I had finished our respective errands, picked up drinks from the bar, and reconvened in my room, away from prying eyes. We started with the cash, simply because that was the easiest to split. 2 silver from Lyle's quest, and an impressive 1 gold and 12 silver from the warlock's purse left us with 12 silver each. Not a bad start. The purse also contained a small garnet gem, which we agreed I'd sell. Next, we delved into the items. I'd received a leather skullcap from Sourpuss's quest, which went to Lyle without any discussion. Even though it was light armor, it looked really sturdy, and any helm was better than no helm. The rings were pretty basic starter stuff, especially for such a notorious and wicked warlock. There was a copper ring of minor intelligence, boosting intelligence by +1, which I immediately donned, and a similar one, boosting endurance with +1 for Lyle. The necklace, however, was a different matter. The material looked like silver, only darker in hue with a dark blue sheen. The chain itself was heavy, seemingly comprised by 6 separate thinner chains that were woven and interlocked in varying patterns. When I read the item description, my jaw dropped, and I instantly started salivating from sheer greed. True Silver Amulet of Excellence. This amulet could easily be mistaken for a silver amulet, and an expertly crafted one at that. The reason that it has been crafted in true silver, however, is obvious, because true silver can hold heavier enchantments than silver. The necklace causes the mental and social skills of the wearer to skyrocket. +8 to charisma, +3 to intelligence. The amulet alone would boost the efficiency and damage of my spells by almost 1/3, and even better, there was no doubt that this item was for me. Apart from this, I'd found a whole hoard of stuff I happily kept for myself as we'd agreed upon. 5 wine bottles of different and unknown vintages, which hopefully ought to pay for a couple of lessons with Grek, a large and disgusting pile of body parts from our enemies, which I hoped would be useful as items for crafting. Otherwise, they'd end up as vendor trash, what you called an item when it was good for nothing but selling to a vendor, usually at a low price. Also the book that the warlock had held cradled in his dying hands, of course. I was chomping at the bit to study the book in peace and see what nobody else in the village knew about the wicked warlock's dying moments and thoughts. But I decided to shove the thought to the back of my mind for a while. Right then was the time to celebrate a successful first outing with Lyle. Oh, and there also was a mystery box, a wooden box containing 6 glass orbs the size of large marbles, which all held some sort of colored, twisting fog on the inside. The official name tag was, of course, Unidentified Item. We spent some time chatting and going over the day, retelling and embellishing on the details of the battles. I sacrificed one of the wine bottles to the good cause, and the tales grew taller, while our laughter grew louder, and when Lyle left a bit later, he was anxious to get home to his parents and tell them of his exploits, or in his words, maybe the least humiliating half of it. When he'd left, I experienced something I hadn't felt since the beginning of my impromptu attempt at early retirement. Happiness. I wasn't entirely sure which part of the day had encouraged this result. The easy camaraderie with Lyle, the hard-won battles, or the spoils. But for once, I was entirely at peace with myself. I opened the shutters, took out my violin, and just played for a while, serenading the evening forest. A couple of deer were grazing peacefully right on the other side of the stockade. Oh, and my number one fan, the lizard, was also out. As a reward, I treated them to a melody inspired by Bambi Little April Shower. It was just as nauseatingly cute as the original, but hey, that's the kind of mood I was in. Later, I lowered my violin and turned my back to the forest. The Warlock's book was lying on my table, beckoning me to delve into its secrets. Rubbing my hands together in anticipation, that is just what I did. I might be alone in this among gamers, but above the loot gains and even skill and level increases, this was what I loved. Knowing that I'd revealed yet another part of a puzzle, and there was another history to unfold before me. The title read, Memoirs of Warren Tickenhauser. A bit disappointing, really. The cover was definitely not made from human skin, there was no writing in blood inside, and it shockingly lacked all instructions on how best to sacrifice virgins in order to summon dark forces from the netherworlds. Most of all, he talked about practicing his mental exercises, gathering flowers and plants for potions, supposedly all crushed when the tower collapsed, and pining away for the love of his life, Cassandra Drizzlefog, Gillem's mother. Of course, this had only come as a surprise for someone who hadn't been reading the quest description. What I didn't know was exactly why he'd decided to off Mama Drizzlefog. Realizing that there'd be no groundbreaking magic reveals in the tome, I started leafing through the pages to get on with it. I was talking to myself while I did so. Filthy habit, but someone had to come up with all the horrible jokes, and I was the only one present. Blah, blah, blah. Newcomer to the area, lot of prejudice because he's a warlock, decides to build outside of town. Boring anecdotes about the area, the fauna, and his mental disciplines. And people wonder why I never liked reading. Oh, he finally meets the girl. Lovely. Maybe we can get on with this story and... Yes, of course. Poetry. Horrible, mangled poetry. And lots of it. Ugh. Well, at least he starts talking to the girl at some point. And gets rejected. Quelle surprise. I wonder if that's when he snapped. No, it seems that the rejection only spurs him on. Roses, gifts, poetry. No wonder that she keeps on turning him down, if he inflicts that trash on her. But, at long last it's starting to get interesting. He actually believes that he's getting somewhere. Starts seeing timid, encouraging smiles from her. This is something else. I'd expected wicked and vindictive, not completely delusional. Let's see what happens next. Wait, that can't be right. He gets into a clandestine mail exchange with her and starts having secret dates with her. This is starting to sound less and less like delusions, unless he completely snapped, and he claims that she was actually buying into his declarations of endless love and talking about ending it with her husband. This is getting pretty exciting. I wonder when we get to the showdown. There we go. On that fateful night, I did depart with my heart filled with hope and love, burning for my Cassie. She was radiant, like a florid moonbeam wrapped in a form-fitting dress. She was shining with love for me, and wearing my gift, as she announced to the world that she was going to leave him, her husband, who had failed to provide her with the love she needed to flourish, like a flower needs water, shade, and dirt. For me. Yet, in our moment of triumph, my world collapsed slowly along with my flower, as she stumbled to the ground, burning from a spell cast from the shadows. My mental capacities failed to engage, and I stood gaping, empty and frozen as a fiend from the shadows spewed nonsense about being her only true love and not letting her get away with abandoning him. The husband, former husband maybe, I could not form a coherent thought, charged the shadows, shouting obscenities. A short chant emanated from the shadows, and he fell moments later, shrouded in frost. To this day, I don't know why I was spared, but I was left alone in the darkness, lonelier even than I had been before meeting Cassie, because back then I did not know that this kind of love existed, and now I had experienced it and lost it again. I cried over her body, unaware of the progression of time or anything but my grief. Later, however, when I heard angry voices approaching, I suddenly realized how I must look. Alone, over her dead body. Maybe I should have faced them and professed my guilt. But the pain was too much, so I cradled Cassandra's necklace, the only thing on her that had escaped destruction, near to my heart, and fled into the night. Wait, Cassandra's necklace? He isn't talking about my new necklace, is he? Hell, if I'm forking it over to anybody. Also, fire, ice, and chance, that pretty much limits the perp to either a sorcerer or a demonologist. Should narrow down the field a bit in this place. Damn. Is this for real? Has the entire village been tricked? Better read on. Today I awoke to face a world bereft of love and a reason to live. I could think of naught but her charred body in my arms, and an eternity to face without her. After an eternity of self-pity, I started thinking about her son, who was in the same position as I was, alone in the world, with no one to care for him. While I did not know how I would move forward, at the least I might be able to honor my Cassie and provide for her son. I ordered a shrine to be constructed for Cassandra for the tavern, a memorial depicting Grant's Crossing as it was on the very last perfect day when she was still among the living. I also ordered a secret shrine to be added, an inheritance for the son. Later, I will instruct him on how to open the shrine. Really now? Here's to hoping he actually included that part later. Man, he really was one sad, melodramatic gnome. Well, I suspect I might be the same in his shoes, but it sure is one sad epitaph. Oh, no. The next pages are blank. Wait, there's one final page here. Looks like it was hastily scribbled down. Oh, and the obligatory blood spatter stains the page as well. This is definitely a post-battle entry. How could they do this to me? I have gathered plants to cure the diseases of their children, spent my money in their stores, called them friends and loved them. Even when they turned against me, I could not raise a hand against them. They have but been misled by the true killer. I tried to run, but my legs were crushed by the falling stone. My only solace lies in knowing that I will be joining her soon, but her killer. If there is any sort of justice above the depths, I will return as a shade to haunt his every moment. The next, final part was written in a shaky hand, in large, crooked letters which had pierced the parchment in several places. To any who might find this journal, I implore you, ensure that justice is done and the wicked brought low. Show this journal to my brother Verdun in solitude when the task is done. He will reward you. I go now to rest. Upon reading the final words, I received 2 pop-ups. Quest updated. Digging for old bones. You have discovered the reality of what actually took place when Cassandra Drizzlefog was slain. Inform Gillum Drizzlefog of the facts. Optional extra. Hand over his mother's necklace. Reward? Unknown. You have been offered a quest. Unwrap the gift. Chronicler quest. The warlock Warren Tickenhauser hid an inheritance for Gillum Drizzlefog inside the magically constructed bar desk. Unlock the secrets hidden inside the desk, either alone or with Gillum. Reward? Unknown. Accept or decline. I groaned out loud. How could Exogenics do this to me? First, they presented me with an awesome item, and then they threw a curveball at me, saying, "Hey, you liked what you got behind door number 1? Well, how would you like to trade for what's behind the unopened door number 2? It's just too good an offer to turn down. Mayhaps." I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was pretty sure the decision was going to cost me some hours of procrastinating before I could decide on what to do. Apart from that filthy trick, I felt damn good about the day's progression. The combat had gone surprisingly well, and I had managed to complete what probably amounted to a rare quest along with a number of smaller quests. That, and I'd finally managed to hit level 3 as I turned in Sourpuss's quest for the feral felines. I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to spend my stat points, and saved all 5 for the time being, which gave me a feeling of, for the first time, being ahead of the game. With that lovely, fuzzy feeling inside, I turned in and fell straight asleep. Chapter 17. Knowledge is Power 2. The following day, I awoke to recall that I still had the minor wasting disease debuff, and in short progression decided that this should be a day for learning and completing quests. I had great hopes for learning a good handful of new tricks during the day, as there were a good number of possibilities that I'd heretofore failed to investigate fully. I decided for myself that I'd spend the time until noon learning a bit more about my Chronicler class, and then I'd postpone my decision of whether to turn in the necklace, along with the quest for Gillum, until around noon, and maybe even try to locate Grek and see if a couple of wine bottles would make him tractable enough to teach me some new bard tricks and spells. After breakfast, and a longing look at the bar table, man, I was looking forward to cracking the code on that one and see what Gillum's inheritance was. I went outside to another clear and sunny day and puttered over to the local graveyard to pay a visit to the local chronicler teacher, Chertog. On my way, I did allocate my stat points, 3 to endurance and 2 to charisma. I loved how hard my spells hit, but so far I really wasn't doing too good at the whole avoid being hit task. Basically, extra hit points were a necessity. This time around, I tried crossing my arms tight over my chest as I allocated the points, and could literally feel how my chest expanded slightly with additional bulk and muscle. Chertog was out and about in the graveyard when I visited, doing something with a rake. Observing him for a bit, delving into my extensive knowledge from countless games and computer games, my assessment was that he looked every bit the stereotypical dwarf. Shorter than 1.4 meters, wider than he was tall and heavily bemuscled, he looked like someone who'd have been able to headbutt the dire rat into submission. I'd met Chertog a few times before at the inn, and there were only 2 details which made him stand out from every other dwarf I'd ever seen. He wasn't wearing any armor, only a hard-wearing brownish robe liberally smudged with dirt, and he had practically no hair. His pate was clean-shaven, and he only sported a single thin tuft of hair on his chin. Every time I saw him, my mind screamed, "Oh my God, a dwarf villain!" I decided that I'd better not mention anything, however, as dwarves were notorious about being touchy about their beards. Also, in a small village like this one, I would likely be able to get all details and more at the tavern later on at the cost of a couple of ales. I walked up to him and coughed politely. Chertog twitched and started looking at the ground around him.
You trying to scare me again, Sans? I ain't falling for it this time.
At this point, he noticed me and turned towards me.
Oh, it's the bard again. You seen a skeleton hiding around here? He's such a pain in the behind. Man, I have a bone to pick with him.
He looked at me, as if expecting something. I thought, did he just do that on purpose? Never mind. Better answer him instead of staring at him like a yokel. I responded, No skeletons around here. And I'm sorry to say that I haven't moved forward in your task. His quest, looking into why entire bodies were disappearing from the graveyard, was one of the first ones I'd received in Grant's Crossing. And I still hadn't looked into it at all, what with being busy with, well, everything else. He shrugged.
No matter. Archangelo, was it? I won't be falling for any more tricks from that old bag of bones anyway. I can see right through him.
Both his eyebrows shot up, and he stared straight at me. My mind was drawing a complete blank. Were those horrible, horrible puns? No, it couldn't be. Are you saying that the undead are actually active around here and that I'm looking for skeletons? Chertog visibly deflated.
You humans have a horrible sense of humor. That was prime material, and you didn't even twitch a muscle. Bah, you're probably too daft to even catch it. Now, never mind all that. What did you want to ask me about?
I hesitated, momentarily lost for words. Were there no normal people in this bloody village? I've been named a chronicler a few days ago, and I was really just looking for some instructions on, what that truly entails. Oh, and, wait 1 damn minute. So that quest you sent me on a couple of days ago was that also just one big joke setting me up for the whole undead are on the loose shtick? Chertog's face turned grave, and he said,
I would never waste a person's time like that. There truly have been bodies going missing. Another the night before yesterday, and I still hope you'll be able to help me with that. I'm pretty damn certain that it ain't undead skeletons, though. Know how I can tell?
One side of his mouth started twitching almost imperceptibly when he asked. I gave it some thought, but came up blank and shook my head. Chertog's stomach started shaking while he answered.
None of them would dare piss me off, you see. They don't have the guts.
He bent over and started roaring with laughter. I groaned audibly, but he seemed to take that like encouragement because he collected himself and continued.
No, I'm only kidding. Skellies are never frightened. Nothing gets under their skin.
I rubbed my eyes and held up my hands in defeat. Please stop already, Chertog. You're killing every funny bone in my body. Now I'm doing it as well. Please, let's forget this ever happened. I really need your guidance. That last part apparently caught his attention, because he straightened up and wiped away a wayward tear from his eye.
All right, you spoil sport. I'll let you off easy this time. So you're saying that for some reason you went and made a chronicler of yourself, and now you want to know what that actually means. Well, for one, it means you're dafter than daft to buy into something without looking into the consequences. I suppose there's no turning back and choosing something else, reborn like you?
He raised an eyebrow in question. I nodded my head in confirmation and silently admonished myself for having done exactly what he berated me for. Acting without thinking really seemed to be the major theme of the month for me. He nodded to himself, and the corner of his mouth quirked up as he continued.
Well, I guess I'm not one to judge. Listen, I'll give you the short version of my experience as a chronicler and let you judge for yourself whether you've screwed up choosing this path for yourself or not. But first, certain formalities have to be observed. Follow me.
He led me back to his house, a sturdy, reinforced building the size of a large shed, and walked in ahead of me, leaving me staring at the inside of the building in astonishment. While everything was clean as a whistle and looked to be made in quality materials, every available inch of the building was packed with books, scroll cases, writing materials, and other paraphernalia, the function of which I could only guess at. A pile of stone tablets stacked on a table here and a pile of animal skins there. The bookiest person in Grant's Crossing. Jeb had been right on the money there. Surprisingly, the chaos seemed to be under some sort of system, because Chertog walked straight to a pile of books and picked out one book in particular, before turning back to me with a satisfied sigh. He held up the book between us and said,
This part I've always liked. You need to draw a bit of your blood. Just a drop, really. Place your hand on the journal and repeat what I say.
I felt pretty clueless, but pricked the tip of my finger and put my hand on top of the book, watching as it soaked up my blood. Chertog nodded to himself, lost in thought, and then intoned in a grave voice,
Nuk kadan az Thorokian anim.
Nuk kadan az Thorokian anim. I struggled with the harsh dwarven intonation, but followed his lead. He then continued with alternating sentences in common and dwarfish, and I repeated the best I could.
Nuk kadan az Thorokian anim. Enter now the path of truth.
Nuk kadan os Thorokian anim, enter now the path of truth.
Da karik kohis haritz. Goddess faith and fact provide.
Da karik koris haritz, goddess faith and fact provide.
Othak ath ein eron chronol nos. Knowledge spread and ignorance soothe.
Othak ath ein eron chronul nos, knowledge spread and ignorance soothe.
Thamar var agnuk othok, lest you stray far from her side.
Thamar var agnuk othok, lest you stray far from her side. When I spoke the final words, I could feel an unfamiliar sensation, as if someone took a hold of something deep within me, clenched, and pulled. Panicking, I had the time to think, swearing a blood oath in an unknown language? Clever, Danny boy, clever. Before the resulting pop-ups assuaged my fears. You have soul-bound an item. Chronicler's Journal Book. Your journal book is the repository of all true knowledge that you uncover in the world of chains. Keep it secret. Keep it safe. You have been offered a choice of religion. Saroon. The path of the chronicler supports the designs of Saroon, the goddess of knowledge and pathways. By choosing to walk this road, you further her designs and devote yourself to the pursuit of truth, knowledge, and delving into the unknown. Take Saroon as your personal deity and become her follower. Accept or decline. That was intriguing. They had introduced the worshipping of gods into the world of chains? I rather liked the idea of getting in good with the goddess of knowledge and pathways, whatever that meant. But this time, I'd better investigate a bit before I jumped right into it. I cleared my throat, So, Chertog, that dwarven bit, what was that about? He shrugged and said,
Dwarves insist that the chronicler profession originates from the dwarves. Of course, so do the humans and the elves, but what do they know, right? Thing is, for dwarves, being a chronicler isn't just a job, it's a devotion. You leave your family behind to get a new one, and that part of the ritual is about welcoming the young dwarf to his new family. It's what I did too. Was always an inquisitive kid, or nosy, as my father used to say. And when I first joined up as a chronicler, I knew that I'd ended up in the right place. They told me that I needed to be curious, delve into ancient history as well as present time. This I did. They told me that my curiosity should be boundless, but that the easy and quick answer was often a lie. I took it to heart. They told me that if I worked hard to better myself, gain knowledge, and pursue the hidden truths of the world, I would be able to gain fame and fortune and rise among the ranks of chroniclers worldwide. And it was all true. I did gain fame, fortune, and the respect of my fellow chroniclers as I rose among their ranks. They just neglected to hand me one tiny piece of information, which I'm giving you for free. Politics beats knowledge. Every damn time.
My face was probably scrunching up in confusion. I had no clue what he was aiming at. Before I could say anything, however, he chuckled and continued.
Yeah, I am being a bit hazy on the details, aren't I? Well, what I'm trying to say is this. Even though the main focus of a chronicler is the search for knowledge and truth, you ignore the politics of your surroundings at your own detriment. While I was rising in the ranks, I managed to make quite a few enemies. Some because they just had a really lousy sense of humor, but mostly because I didn't really care about politics and what my unveilings might mean to my countrymen.
His mien went darker, and his animated gestures less lively as he continued.
Long story short, at one point I managed to dig up an amazing story on a venerable old merchant lord. Triple-checked the facts and my sources like I always did, but the moment I revealed it, everything went wrong. The merchant lord challenged my findings, my proof went missing, and my sources refused to talk. Before I knew what was happening, I was banished from my homelands, and the only reason I managed to maintain a bit of my honor—
At this, he was stroking his chin with an angry look on his face.
—was that I agreed to sequester myself in an obscure village completely off the map and perform a moronic task for the rest of my life, which might be a colossal waste of time or might, at some point, aid the dwarven race somehow.
After this tirade, it took Chertog a visible effort to pull himself together, and I could almost see his regular facade clicking back into place, and therefore I wasn't surprised when he continued.
You know, it really shouldn't have come as a surprise for me. I mean, a low blow from dwarves? Practically a no-brainer, right?
This one time I indulged him, just to cheer him up, and chuckled quietly. Really, Chertog? Tall guy jokes about your fellow dwarves? I'd have figured you to have higher standards. Chertog's rough guffaw cleared away the depressing mood that had been encroaching on us, and a corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile.
Anyway, I guess you also want some of the more down-to-earth information about how it all works, right? Or did I manage to scare you away?
I waved off his concerns. No, please, go ahead. I'm all ears. Another guffaw.
Yeah, I noticed.
I started massaging my temples. That one wasn't even on purpose. I meant to say, please enlighten me, O wise and benevolent master chronicler. He chuckled.
Flattery. I love it. All right. Hard and practical facts. Easy to digest. As long as you keep your eyes and ears open, you will realize that you are surrounded by unsolved riddles, false history, and unsubstantiated rumors concerning everything from the pedigree of your neighbor's dog to which sheets the mayor is tangling nightly. Once you start untangling these knots, you will also arrive at certain nuggets of knowledge, as pure as mithril ore, which you know for a fact and have proved to be true. Begin inscribing these in your journal, both the way you came to the knowledge and the information itself, and investigating the mysteries that come to you, and you will improve as a chronicler. Then...
He stopped himself and shook his head.
Sorry, my natural loquaciousness got away with me. The short and clear version, then. Do good chronicler work, and you'll improve as a chronicler. With experience, your skills will improve, you will gain new, useful skills, and you may even learn a few chronicler spells. This'll come to you naturally. However, it can't be taught. Do good enough work. I can help you determine when you've reached that point, and you might be able to advance in rank as a chronicler if you pass the tests that you were given. Oh, and if you rise enough in rank, you risk becoming famous. Or infamous. Clear enough for you?
That did sound great to me. So not only did the profession gain me the chance to become a veritable Indiana Jones, delving into scripture on temple walls and ancient hieroglyphs and books in order to right ancient wrongs, uncover truths, and find epic loot, it also gave me the opportunity to gain extra skills along the way. I decided to jump at the chance to complete the quest I'd gained earlier at the cavern door and said, "Lovely. It's exactly what I need to get started, Chertog. I don't mind learning by doing it all. I just have one quick question and one part where I need some clarification. First, the question. Earlier, you said something about a moronic task you were forced to accept? That wouldn't have anything to do with a certain door inside the Bronze Bell's mine, would it?" His eyebrows shot up, and he looked straight at me.
What? Who the hell told you that? Oh, that's right. You've been touring with Lyle, that little tattletale. Pfft. Forget about it, son. I'm not telling you anything until I figure out whether you're worth half a damn as a chronicler. Next question.
Quest updated. Here be ? Part 1. Chronicler Quest. You have discovered a door in an underground cave which seems to have been made to keep something or someone from exiting the cave. Figure out the story behind the door. Chertog has confirmed that he knows something about the door. Return to him when you have gained at least Chronicler Skill Level 10. Reward? Unknown. I harumphed. All right. Where does the goddess Saroon come into the picture? And what does becoming her follower entail? He waved his hands dismissively at the air.
I, along with most dwarves, don't bother with her. Who'd choose to worship a god of human aspect of their own free will?
He shrugged and continued.
But sure, I get the attraction. If searching for knowledge is your calling, you might as well go all the way and join the cult. Or whatever it is the followers of Saroon do. For what it's worth, I haven't heard any negative stuff about her, and I've heard tell of especially talented chroniclers who have received special attention from Saroon. No details, however. If you want some better information, you'd better keep your ears stiff.
I get it, Chertog. I almost preferred the skeleton jokes. Thank you very much for the information, however. I'd better get to work then and ask around for anybody who knows a bit more about Saroon. Oh! I facepalmed myself. Or maybe I could just ask Mallard Bullhop for information on Saroon. He smirked.
Yeah, well, if you want the easy solution, I guess you could also ask the only resident expert on all things spiritual. Don't worry, if you were daft enough to keep running around asking the whole world about Saroon, I would have pointed you in his direction.
His eyes sparkled with mirth.
Eventually.
I turned around and started walking towards the door while I threw my hands in the air in frustration. You're a horrible teacher, Chertog. He tailed me out of the building and snapped his fingers as if he'd just thought of something.
Ha! You know what's the difference between you and these good people in the ground around here?
I kept walking. Enough already, Chertog.
One of you composes, the others decompose.
I kept walking and held my hands over my ears. That didn't stop him from shouting after me, however.
What? I'm funny! This guy was positively laughing his skull off!
As I left the cemetery, shaking my head at the severe lack of normal people in Grant's Crossing, I surprised myself by coming to the realization that I actually liked Chertog. Sure, his humor was horrible, and he was as barmy as they come. But he seemed genuine and kind, deep down. Chapter 18. The Only Decent Thing to Do. Seeing that the hour was getting past 10 in the morning, I probably stood a good chance of stumbling upon Gillum if I returned to the tavern, and with that, I had a decision to make concerning the necklace. Should I keep it or give it to Gillum when I turned in the quest? If it had only been a regular game instead of World of Chains, the answer would have been easy for me. The vast majority of all games are created to make the player feel special, exceptional even. And therefore, any quest such as this one that seemed to leave the player at a disadvantage would 9 times out of 10 be the better choice. Instead of the item in question, you'd be sure to receive incredible reputation, another quest, or some awesome heirloom that the quest giver just so happened to have stashed away and was suddenly willing to part with. World of Chains? You might as well toss a coin instead because it doesn't work the same way. NPCs were free to do whatever the hell they liked based on their personality, their rep with you, and some sort of algorithm probably. Hell if I knew. Therefore, I resorted to an old-fashioned round of pros and cons. For the cons, there was the real kicker. In short, it was an incredible item. With those stats, I'd be sure to be able to use the necklace for the next 20 levels at minimum, maybe more. And as long as I kept it tucked away under my clothing, Gillum would never know. Odds were good that whichever reward I might receive instead wouldn't come close to the value of the necklace. Hell, it was probably worth as much as all the rewards I'd received so far together, not counting the violin, as it wasn't really mine to keep. In favor of giving it away, I believed that it was the only right and decent thing to do. Of course, I was just kidding around with myself. Like 99 out of 100 people who play games, I was only in the game for my own amusement and gratification, and I'd have a hard time believing anybody who tried to convince me that they were different. What else, then? Well, there was a pretty nice potential for a good rep gain with Gillum, and therefore with the village. Gillum also tended to be a pretty nice guy overall and seemed like the type to settle his accounts. Lastly, we had the remainder of the quest, the secrets inside the bar table. I'd hate to miss the opportunity to solve that riddle, and giving him the necklace might give me some extra points in my favor. The dark horse in this game was, of course, that I had no clue as to how Gillum would react when I showed him the truth about his mother. Anger? Denial? Gratitude? A desire for revenge, perhaps? Then and there, I decided to wait until I'd seen his reaction before I decided whether I'd throw the necklace on the sacrificial altar for the sake of the quest. If he was completely unreachable, maybe this one piece of hard evidence could get to him. 15 minutes later, I had my answer. Anger and denial. Gillum's usually cheerful face was dark with rage and scrunched up in a horrible scowl as he was poring over the journal, delivering a tirade to the world in general. Luckily, he'd agreed to my suggestion to take our business downstairs, where we wouldn't be bothered by customers, and therefore no one had the rare opportunity to see him unhinged like he was at the moment. Even his usually artfully tousled hair was completely out of sorts, as he'd unconsciously been pulling on his locks. After having gone through the entire thing, he turned towards the only present target for his rage, yours truly. He snarled.
Who put you up to this?
I explained the discrepancy I'd located in the tableau of the bar desk, how it had led me to investigate from sheer curiosity, and what I had seen in the tower cellar. With wild eyes, Gillum waved away my explanations.
I'm not buying it, all right? My mother was not a skink, and whatever rumors you've heard are just wrong. So just get the hell out of here and don't speak to me for a while, okay?
I tried to placate him and appeal to his logical side, but he wasn't buying it. My calm and rational approach just seemed to infuriate him even more, to the point that his raised voice made Kif put his head down the stairs and ask if he should
toss the sucker who's pissing you off, boss.
Luckily, he just glared at Kif until he backed off, but he did continue his rant with no signs of slowing down or listening, which ultimately made the decision for me.
Anyway, it's not happening. You already must have decided that this lunatic's ravings were true when you came waltzing in.
Gillem's angry monologue ground to a halt when I produced his mother's necklace and asked him, "Do you recognize this?" He spat.
Where did you find this? No, wait. Of course it was with the blasted warlock's stash. So that part is true, all right, but that still doesn't prove anything but him killing both my parents and stealing her necklace.
I conceded the point, but replied, "True. But do you remember your father giving your mother this necklace? Can you say with certainty that this wasn't a gift from Warren?" This time, even though he still seemed furious, he at least considered the question before responding.
No. My father would never have wasted money on something as frivolous as a necklace, and I do recall her wearing it happily on a number of occasions. Mom did have a lot of admirers, though. This could have come from any number of them.
I nodded, put a hand on his shoulder, and activated my high tide skill. I agree, Gillem. But don't you want to be sure? Why live with the uncertainty when we have the possibility to get to the core of it right away? I could show you how to enter the tower so you could see the warlock's end for yourself, but that won't give you anything extra. Up there, however, I pointed in the general direction of the bar, lies the answer as to whether these findings are the insane ravings of a madman or the absolute truth. Gillem took a deep breath and gathered himself before answering.
All right. Let's take a look. Give me 5 minutes to get ready and give my customers a bad excuse as to why I have to close down the bar for half an hour. And I swear to Tharlan, if there's nothing to this, I'm charging you rent for a month for putting me through this needlessly.
Cleverly, I decided not to mention that I didn't pay any rent. 5 minutes later, we stood before the bar desk, wondering just how to attack the problem. Gillem had kicked everybody out from the bar, and if I smelled a bit of alcohol on his breath, I didn't begrudge him anything. Hell, if anybody needed something stronger than beer with the day they'd had, it should be him. I scratched my head and turned towards Gillem. So, how about we go over everything in detail and see whether there's anything obvious to see, like your name next to a lever or something similar? 10 minutes of close scrutiny didn't bring us anything, and we'd even used a magnifying glass in some of the spots. The back of the bar desk was all business. A single no-nonsense hardwood shelf with nowhere obvious to hide anything, as was the lower front of the desk, also hardwood without any decorations whatsoever. I grinned. If anything, that just made the quest all the more exciting. I got out Warren's journal again, leafing through the pages while thinking aloud. All right, Gillem, help me here. The only solid information we have is this passage. I ordered a shrine to be constructed for Cassandra for the tavern, a memorial depicting Grant's Crossing as it was on the very last perfect day when she was still among the living. I also ordered a secret compartment to be added, an inheritance for the son. Later, I will instruct him on how to open it. Maybe it's something in the map itself. Is there anything that's the least bit off, like a building that shouldn't be there, a new clearing in the forest, or something? We both engaged in another round of scrutiny, with the same lack of result. I huffed, lost in thought. Let me read that again. Does this part read a bit funny to you? I mean, the text says the very last perfect day, yet the front of the bar desk clearly shows off a night sky, right? I'd actually meant for that question to be rhetorical, but Gillem surprised me.
No, that's not what it is.
He interjected, certainty clear in his voice.
Those are all star signs.
I perked up. This might be the key. Right, so I know next to nothing about star signs. Would these signs happen to correspond to a certain date or period of time? I kept my fingers crossed, hoping for the right answer. He nodded.
Yeah. Huh. So you're saying the key might be the date and the star sign that suits?
I smiled, nodding. Exactly. Or, well, maybe your mother's birthday? Anyway, let's start with the date. Warren's journal says October 20th. Which star sign would that be? He indicated 5 twinkling lights.
The summoner, that's this one right here, 3 stars in a straight line from the body. And these 2 are the arms raised up high for a summoning.
I moved closer until my nose was almost touching. All right. Let's see if there's anything different about these. The colors seem to be similar to the others. The placement... hell if I know. Can you tell if anything's off about their placement, Gillum? Gillum moved around behind me while I kept up my mental checklists, muttering, "What else could there be?" I touched one of the stars, scrunched my face in concentration, and touched the star sign next to it, then instantly patted wildly behind me until I got a hold of Gillum's arm and dragged him to my side. "Take your hand and place it on the star sign." He drew his lower lip between his teeth and placed his hand over the entire star sign.
Funny. It feels sort of warm, like a pulsating feeling, right?
Exactly. We waited together in silence for a bit until I realized I had been holding my breath in anticipation. Disappointed, I expelled my breath and said, "Damn, I thought for sure that was it. I think we're onto something, though. Let's see if we can find anything similar." I felt convinced that the pair of us were a sight for sore eyes for the next couple of minutes as we investigated every diminutive detail of the bar desk with our hands. Suddenly, Gillum cried out.
"Here! I've got another."
His hand was located not among the star signs, but on the map itself, right over the tavern. He tried holding his hand over that point and the star sign, but still nothing happened. I scratched my head, thinking, and then slapped my hand down on the bar desk. "Ha!" Gillum flinched in surprise, and I held up both hands in silent apology, and then put on a huge grin. "If I'm right about this, you'll have to break out the good stuff to celebrate." I looked at the bar desk, estimating the distances. You'll probably have to kick off your shoe and use your foot to cover the star sign and reach the remaining 2 spots." He did as I asked, and after a bit of activity that probably looked like 3D Twister, he covered the star sign with his foot, the right hand on the tavern, and I guided his left hand to the Warlock's tower. His raised eyebrows attested to the fact that it felt right. And a couple of seconds later, a quiet click broke the silence as a hidden cupboard swung open. We both stared in amazement for a bit, before I erupted in a huge celebratory "Yes!" Gillum, however, was suddenly reticent, and I smiled at him and inclined my head towards the desk. "Go ahead, my friend. Check out your inheritance. I'll be at a table back here." A while later, Gillum walked over to my table with his hair askew and red eyes. In a hoarse voice, he said,
"Read this."
He handed me an unsealed letter. The handwriting in front simply said, "For Gillum Drizzlefog," and the page inside only had a few paragraphs. "Dear Gillum, I apologize for not saying this to your face, but among the myriad of flaws I will own to, a lack of courage resides among the most predominant. Suffice to say that I, who loved your mother with my entire heart, failed to protect her. And for that, I am punished with the most horrible torment. A life without her. I can never apologize enough for this failure and will not insult you by trying. Thus, I choose the coward's way once again. Please accept this inheritance as a means to secure your future in a life without the person we both loved the most. Should you ever deign to visit me, know that everything I own is yours. Sincerely, Warren Tickenhauser. A tear slid from the tip of Gillem's nose.
He ordered the bar desk made before his death and included a copy of their correspondence. His and that of my mother.
His voice broke, and he took a deep breath before continuing.
It's her, Archangelo. There's no doubt. It's all true. And their love, it's beautiful.
I quickly decided to keep my opinion of Warren's poetry to myself, kept my face carefully neutral, and just nodded. He sniffed and carried on.
I'm sorry for doubting you. Know what? I'll just start by breaking out the good stuff like you said. And then we'll talk, okay?
He gave me a vague smile and walked towards the cellar. A short while later, Gillem returned, looking more composed than earlier and carrying a large smile, as well as a large dust-covered clay crock. He placed it on the table, scooted over a chair, and sat down with a sigh.
First, I'd like to get the uncomfortable part over with. I am extremely sorry for how I just treated you and how I reacted. I don't really know what came over me, but it's unpleasant to know that I could lose control like that. Thank you for talking me down.
I snorted and slapped his shoulder. Remember who you're talking to? I'm practically the king of overreacting. Actually, come to think of it, this kind of feels like the first real conversation we had. Only the tables are turned. His frown gradually disappeared.
Yeah, it does feel familiar, doesn't it? It won't happen again, though. Promise.
He looked really relieved and rubbed his hands together in anticipation.
And now, for the spoils.
He hefted the clay crock, holding it into the air pensively.
You know, I won this beer in an arm wrestling competition with a passing mercenary captain years ago. I've been saving it for when I would finally be able to pay off my loan on the tavern. With the interest I had to accept to be able to take it over back when my parents died, I had expected another 10 to 15 good years before I'd be able to call it my own. Today, however, with the money that he left me in the inheritance, you are looking at a proud, newly fledged tavern owner, and it's all because of you.
Gillem looked me straight in the eye, and I had to look away to keep from blushing. He waved away any protestations and kept on singing my praises.
I know that the warlock, Warren, is the one who left me the money. But if it hadn't been for you, nobody would have looked into this ever. For us here in Grant's Crossing, all of this was ancient history. I don't want you to believe that I take your help for granted, and with that in mind, I would like to grant you a few well-earned rewards. A small handful of gold, my deepest gratitude, and what you've been seeking from the moment you set foot in our tiny village.
I received a whopping 5 gold. There went my money problems, and an amazing pop-up. Your reputation with Gillem Drizzlefog has increased by 2,000. New reputation, 3,775. Respected. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 1,000. New reputation, 2,125. Liked. That was plain awesome. Oh, and my diplomacy skill had gained 2 levels. Nice job of convincing him, while my spot skill had increased yet again. I could hardly concentrate on these nice rewards, drooling with anticipation as I was for what he was about to say next. Could he really gain me access to my financials? Was the easy life right there, waiting for me? He cleared his throat and put on a crooked smile.
Truth is, I'm not too happy with this myself, but you've earned it. I have an old favor I can cash in with Autoria, our kind-hearted mayor, remember? It will take me some time to get the wheels in motion, a week most likely, but at the end of that time, she should be ready to open a portal for you. Wherever you wish to go.
I could feel my anticipation forming into some other emotion. Something conflicted. Clearly, this was a good thing for me. I'd be able to live way more comfortably off my musician skills in a big city. But damn it, I was just starting to enjoy myself here. Ah, well, that was a dilemma for another day, and I thanked Gillum profusely. He quickly waved off my thanks and rose to stand next to my chair, looking me solemnly in the eye.
Now that the easy part is over with, I have a difficult thing to ask of you.
I couldn't keep one eyebrow from lifting. Hadn't I done enough already? I at least managed to keep quiet and wait for Gillum to continue his exposition. And maybe I even had an idea where this was going.
Archangelo, I would ask for you to keep quiet about the whole thing for now in order that no one suspects that we know what happened those 20 years ago. Then I want you to figure out, slyly and without anybody finding out what you're up to, who actually did kill my parents.
I wasn't entirely shocked. Anybody who'd just figured out that they'd been living a lie would want to see the culprit brought to justice. Count me in, Gillum. And then when we know who did it, we tell the authorities and bring him to justice? He just looked at me like I'd fallen down from the sky, and his always amiable expression hardened to something entirely different.
No, Archangelo. Then we make him burn.
You have been offered a quest, digging for old truths, chronicler quest. You have uncovered part of the truth. The warlock Warren Tickenhauser was framed for the murder of Gillum Drizzlefog's parents. Now, you need to figure out who really performed the misdeed and why. Reward unknown. Accept or decline. I accepted the quest, and after the worst shell shock at seeing Gillum so unhinged had faded, the next hour went by swimmingly, and we spent some quality time male bonding in the old-fashioned style, alcohol and tall tales. Mid-chat, I suddenly recalled the quest I'd received for gathering information on the creation of Grant's Crossing, and asked him whether he could tell me what it had been like for his parents and him back then. He scratched his head and said,
I haven't thought about those days in years, but sure. Let me just gather my thoughts.
He got up and moved to the bar before returning with an ale for both of us.
All right. You'll have to recall that I was but 13 years old at the time. Apart from that, everything I know about the founding itself, I heard from my mother. She didn't send for my dad and I until the worst difficulties had been hammered out. It comes down to this, though. Everything that this village is built upon, they've created. In the early days, it was just the four of them, a campfire and a forest full of monsters. Or so it seemed to my mother. They arrived 6 persons tall and well-prepared with tools and agreements in hand. My mother was in charge of all auxiliaries, cooking, hunting, scouting, handling most of the night shifts and lending the occasional hand wherever it was needed. She was also a deft hand with a crossbow. In her own words, those first days she just seemed to fly from one end of the camp to the other because every single thing had top priority. You may not believe this about Mallard, but he was a bit of a hothead in his youth, and a fairly decent fighter, according to my mother. His major task was keeping everyone constantly blessed and healed from the seemingly constant injuries and helping defend the site. Additionally, he handled all mediation in the group whenever the bickering became too incensed. Grant Callahan did just about everything else. This is also why they ended up naming the village after him, because if it had been for all the others, they would still have been building. From sunup to sundown he toiled, building defenses for the camp, erecting the foundation for the crossing itself, felling trees, and cutting boards. His only breaks were when he had to eat or when he had to hoist his huge axe and defend the camp. The original 4 also brought 2 hired helpers along, official couriers who, for a very hefty wage, helped with the manual labor in the first days and afterwards went west and east respectively, informing the authorities on either side that a, hopefully, permanent safe spot had been erected mid-forest, encouraging them to clear and maintain a proper path and start sending regular patrols. The only person who, according to my mother, didn't really participate was the mayor, who just sat there, scribbling in her book all day and only helped in case of larger attacks. Her delegated task was apparently all the official stuff, which is also why they made her mayor. None of the others had any interest in that. And that's basically how the days went. When they believed that they had established a fairly secure perimeter, they sent off the couriers and went back to work improving everything. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Quest updated. How the Crossing Came to Be. Chronicler Quest. You have learned a smattering of stories about the past of Grant's Crossing. The origin and creation of Grant's Crossing has never been officially chronicled. Compile the true story from the perspective of each of the 4 founders and reveal it to the village at Reveler's Moon. 1 of 4 stories obtained. Afterwards, Gillum opened up the tavern for everybody else again with a flimsy excuse about the boiler, and I enjoyed a hearty lunch, deer sausages and fresh bread, before going for a short walk to clear my head of the worst alcohol fumes. I debated whether I could justify to myself taking the rest of the day off, but in the end, my curiosity about uncovering more secrets of the arts of the bard got the better of me, and I sauntered back to the tavern to wait for Grek's inevitable appearance. Chapter 19. Boating and Barding. Never had I seen Grek as tractable as when I placed 2 bottles of the Warlock's stash in front of him to complete the quest. He tried to wave me off right away, most likely so he could abscond with the bottles and have a dirty menage a trois with them right away. When I pushed him to get my lessons right away, I was getting pretty damn tired of only having 2 damage spells and 2 spells that only worked on humans. He didn't even complain, just growled,
"Quit pissing my time away. We're off,"
and went for the door. Neither his demeanor nor his haste allowed for much conversation, but after a while it became clear that we were heading for the harbor master's lodgings, or, more specifically, for the river vessel's berth. It was the first time I'd actually laid eyes upon the vessel, and, well, underwhelming didn't quite cut it. It was a raft. A big raft, to be sure, with wooden railings on both sides, but for crossing a river as savage and threatening as the Jagged Rush, it really looked insufficient for the task. Well, I lucked out and ended up having to pay for the trip as well. One look at Grek's hostile mug told me that there'd be no cash forthcoming from him, and a short while later, we were on our way across the river. The day proved to be an educational one right off the bat. First, I learned that the raft was more than sufficient to cross the river. 2 half-orc employees pulled the raft along ropes placed on either side of the raft, and the ride seemed effortless for them. Second, I learned that Exogenics employees are sadistic. Seriously, they held in their grubby hands the ability to create a world's laws of physics exactly like they wanted, and still they decided that endurance-challenged individuals like me should be prone to seasickness. I was starting to take it a bit personally, especially when one half-orc started mocking the sounds that the puny human was making. Fortunately, the crossing didn't take much more than a couple of minutes, and I had a chance to compose myself while we were walking along the forest trail. A while later, I was contemplating asking Grek exactly what the plan was, when he turned from the trail and dove into the wilderness. Perplexed, I simply followed him, and after another 5 silent minutes, we arrived at the first man-made thing I'd seen since crossing the river. A huge wooden gate, set smack in the middle of a wooden fence which ranged as far as the eye could see to either side. The gate had a heavy iron chain holding it closed, along with the obligatory large iron padlock. Grek conjured the key for the padlock from somewhere on his person, unlocked the gate, and allowed me entrance to paradise. Seriously, that was the first impression that I got. Beyond the gates were softly rolling hills, a small stream gently lolling by with the sun glittering in its surface, and small animals frolicking everywhere. I almost expected cartoon animals to start some sort of song right away. It was that harmonious. Grek locked the gate behind us, dumped his cloak on the grass, and said,
"That should do it. There is no need for pretense in here, kid. Welcome to my personal training camp. If you could hand over the bottles, we can get started right away. Supposedly, you could become a bit less hopeless."
I still wasn't used to the idea of Grek not actually being a psychopathic drunkard. Well, not entirely at least. I didn't have him figured out at all. I handed over the 2 bottles and said, "Without a doubt, there's a lot you could teach me, Grek. I really need to learn more basic spells and skills. I feel like there's so much more to being a bard that I'm missing because I need some kind of formal training." He harumphed while opening the first bottle with an evil-looking curved knife.
"There is no need for acting the sycophant, Arcangelo. I said I would teach you if you managed to locate some decent vintages, and this... I feel quite confident that you are not exactly a connoisseur, but let us just say that you have earned yourself a longer lesson than the half-hour speed tour I was aiming to give you."
Grek managed to summon a wine cup from somewhere, and then started in on the first bottle. After the first cup, he slowed it down somewhat, gave a deep, satisfied sigh, and turned back to me.
Now, what do you actually know about magic?"
I gave the question the consideration it merited, and was about to tell him about the ideas I'd managed to dredge up during my playtime inside the World of Chains, before I realized that they were just that. Ideas and preconceptions. I had never played a magic wielder myself, and most everything I knew was based on hearsay. I shrugged and said, "Nothing that I know without a doubt to be true." He guffawed and responded,
"Lovely. That saves me from having to disabuse you of any idiotic notions before we start filling your head with actual knowledge. Now sit, listen, and pay attention, because I am not repeating myself. Magic is basically the same, no matter how you choose to approach it. This part usually takes a smidgen of time to digest, but there is no denying it. Whether you are a demonologist calling out to the outer worlds for demons who will beckon to your call, a sorcerer who waves her hands and chants her power words to manipulate the elements, or a shaman dancing his silly little dance and tapping his ridiculous drum, you are doing the exact same thing. Trying to access the magic of Nairus. Magic exists as an inherent part of this world, and there are a number of different ways to approach the matter of manipulating the magic and coercing it to do your will. Every other magic user on Ion loves getting into shouting matches about which school of magic is the true school of thought. The next time you feel tempted to do the same, remember that we are all but tiny little buckets trying to dip into the same world-sized well. Making fun of shamans, however, is allowed."
He took a short break, savoring the last drops of his second cup. I took the opportunity to ask him a question. "Does that mean that I'd have the chance to learn all types of magic, regardless whether I've chosen the bard as my class?" His eyes twinkled, and he said,
"Feel like taking on the world already and learning all magic types? No. Naturally, that is not what it means. While you might theoretically, in time, learn enough about magic and the magic theories of other classes to be able to master some of their lesser spells, you will never increase in skill and aptitude as, say, a summoner, someone who has dedicated her entire life to mastering the intricacies of summoning. What it does mean is that every magic user has 2 essential aptitudes which define how good he is at his craft. One covering the basic spell type or types of his class, and one covering the method that he generally uses to summon or deliver his spells.
Greg probably noticed my forehead furrowing in thought when I tried to digest all this, because he continued.
Let us begin with the average bard as an example. We have our aptitude for sonic spells, defining how good we are at our craft and our skills as musicians, explaining how well we deliver our spells into being. Now, have you tried casting any spells without the music as a guide?
I thought back to the fight with the dire rat and how the spells had felt almost beyond my ability to force into existence when I'd donned my spear instead of the violin. I nodded. Yeah, it felt a lot harder to cast the spells. I felt like I was quite close to failing the cast of one of the spells. I'd chalked it up to being distracted at the time, but you're telling me that it's because I'm not using the right, medium to bring the magic into being, or something like that? Greg squinted, considering, and responded.
That is not an entirely wrong way of approaching it. We bards have music as our chosen method of dipping into the ocean of magic that exists just on the verge of existence as we know it. This does not mean, as you discovered by chance, that we cannot make do without it, only that you will achieve the best results when you train both these essential proficiencies instead of just one. If you survive long enough to leave the Dawnlight Forest and enter one of the larger cities, I will guarantee that you will get to see a lot of magic users who disregard this basic truth and focus only, typically, on their chosen spell types. This is sheer folly, however, as a person who dedicates time and practice to both will be able to manage harder spells and cast the same spells more effectively than one who specializes in either the spell type or the medium, as you put it. You'll probably need some practical examples to make the lesson stick, however. Young people always do. You said that you wanted to learn more spells, right?
I nodded eagerly, trying to look as attentive as possible. He nodded to himself and said,
Well, Arcangelo, in a minute we will put the magic theory you just learned into practice, and then we will allow your own skills to decide whether you learn anything useful or not.
He smirked, looking extremely satisfied with himself.
First, I'll need to tell you this. There are 2 basic ways of learning a spell. One is to pay huge sums for a scroll which basically forces the knowledge needed to learn any given spell straight into your brain, as long as you have the prerequisite level of aptitude with the given spell type. This method is fast, easy, and reliable, and you would be a moron for choosing it as your standard. For what reason, you ask? The following. The second way covers deciding the effect you want to force into the world, creating the accompanying music or tones that you believe are the natural venue to bring forth the effect, and then do it. If you hold the musical talent and the skill for sonic spells that is required and perform flawlessly, you will be able to create any existing bard spell within your range.
I looked at him skeptically. Any spell? Really? But why would anybody choose to pay for a scroll then? He let out a barking laugh.
Is that a joke? Because people are lazy and this approach is pretty damn hard. First of all, the potential spell combinations are actually quite limited in contrast to what you might believe, and also dependent on what is physically possible, depending on the spell type. A bard Grand Master could try all day to create a sonic fireball, and still fail because sound waves simply do not act in the same way as fire. Second, even if you have chosen a feasible spell within your abilities, holding the right mindset and choosing the correct music for the spell requires a lot of trial and error. Basically, there is quite a lot of experimentation involved.
Never mind the work. The possibilities took my breath away. I'd thought that my accomplishments on learning spells by myself during the Bard class quests were limited to that quest line. But if I were able to create any basic spell right now, and even more powerful spells once I grew more talented, I couldn't even process the possible permutations of everything that I wanted to learn. Gathering my focus, I cleared my throat and asked, "So, where's a good place to start?" Greg plopped down onto the grass, refilled his cup, and asked, with a wide smile on his face,
"What do you think you ought to be able to learn?"
The answer flew right out of my mouth without checking with my brain first. "A buff. I definitely ought to learn how to strengthen my group members and influence their combat skills somehow." Greg slapped his knee.
Ha! You got it in one. I am starting to hope that we will be able to turn you into a real bard someday, Arcangelo. What you are talking about is a fundamental skill to all bards and is not just a simple buff. It starts that way, but evolves along with your prowess and according to your choices along the way. Is it something along that line you were seeking?
Something along that line. I was practically drooling. Trying to keep my eagerness in check, I responded, "Yes, that is exactly it, Greg." The corners of his mouth quirked up as he responded.
Ah, too bad. You will need to evolve as a bard before I can teach you that skill, and you are far from powerful enough to continue with your next class quest yet. Better keep at the training, right?
His grin showed off his small, sharp incisors.
It was a good idea, though. Any others?
Inside, I was fuming. That dirty little lizard was enjoying this way too much. I snarled, "Well, can you teach me how to push around everybody near you like they're just annoying little fleas? That seems to be something of an expertise for you." I barely got the words out before I was buffeted by what felt like hurricane-like gales of wind, which somehow managed to only affect the area right around me. They tossed me back and forth for a couple of seconds before depositing me on my behind in the dirt, right before Greg. I spent a brief moment contemplating whether I'd ever be able to learn how to keep my temper in check, but when I looked up at his wide grin, I couldn't help but continue. "Yeah, just like that, only more annoying." At that, Greg let out a howling laughter, and I wondered whether his next spell would result in my respawning back in the village, but his next words were simply,
"Yes, I'll be able to teach it to you, but just the basic version, mind you."
My mind was already working on the next comeback, so this left me baffled. Great. Where do I start?" About an hour later, I had learned a lot. First of all, Greg really wasn't a horrible teacher when he wasn't focused on being a sadistic git. True, he was a bit too fond of Socratic questioning, or whatever it's called when you respond to every other question with, "Good question, what do you think?" and really didn't come up with a lot of hard answers, but he did open up the door to the intricacies of magic theory. The second thing I'd learned was that I had next to no idea how sound waves actually worked in practice, and given that the spell I was trying to learn operated by manipulating sound waves, it was probably rather essential that I manage to cobble together at least a basic understanding. Well, it was slow progress, but I was learning. A bit. The final lesson so far that day: this learning spells stuff wasn't an exact science. Quoting Greg, you had to,
"Fix the required outcome of the spell firmly in your mind, Layer this outcome with the tune that best accompanies the image in your mind and call out to the magic. Depending on the exactness of the image and the appropriateness of the music you have chosen, the magic will put higher or lower demands on the levels of musician or magic mastery. To phrase it otherwise, if you are truly talented as a musician, a mage, or both, you can afford to be a bit sloppier in the actual execution and still learn the spell.
I felt that I had the music part down pat. Parts of Antonio Vivaldi's Four Seasons had a violin part portraying a summer storm, which was in turn tempestuous and more relaxed and flowing, and had the exact imagery that I was going for. Someone or something being buffeted by gusts of wind of inconstant intensity. In addition to this, I was creating a mental image of a wind gust appearing out of nowhere to the side of Grek, pushing him towards the ground. I had no qualms about using him as a test dummy. I thought that turnabout would be fair play, and he probably wouldn't even feel whatever tiny gust of wind I'd be able to summon at first. My lack of results lasted until I explained my quandaries to Grek, and he asked me,
Tell me, where do you picture the sound waves originating from?
Well, from myself, of course, I responded. I'm casting the spell, so they have to come from me, right? He proceeded to explain to me, in no uncertain terms, that it'd be quite an impressive task to make sound waves, which always travel in a relatively straight line, move around corners. Feeling chagrined, I amended my mental image to include the sound waves and accompanying sound originating from right next to Grek, and tried again. Only to see an unseen fist of wind hit Grek and cause him to stumble for a few steps before righting himself. With a wide, stupid grin on my face, I relished the resulting pop-up. Congratulations! You have learned a new spell. Sonic Push. You can create a sonic force from a point of origin you decide, buffeting and pushing your target. You can regulate the force of the sound wave and concurrent sound up to the maximum force. Every skill point in Sonic Push will increase the maximum force of the sound wave and add the possibility to chain multiple waves. Properties: range 30 meters, cast time 1 second, cooldown 2 seconds, mana cost 10, maximum number of sound waves 1, stat, charisma. I instantly started playing around with the possibilities, ignoring the annoyed sound from Grek. The sound that accompanied the sound wave was that of a gust of wind, and, well, to be honest, it felt weak to me. I was only starting out, however, and while the spell would never be powerful enough to knock back something with as much mass as the dire rat, it'd surely be efficient against smaller creatures, and as a utility spell, or to get stuff down from the higher shelves. I discovered that I could actually tune the applied power to a very fine degree. It was no telekinesis spell, but I'd definitely be able to use it as a utility spell as well. After patting myself on the back for a job well done, I turned back to Grek, who had meanwhile dug into the second bottle and had a blissful smile on his lips. I decided to leave him alone for a while and try the next one out on my own. My intentions of forging Lyle and me into an effective duo were definitely coming into effect, but I still believed that I needed a little something extra. My mind was set on discovering an effective crowd control spell, and I believed that I had a decent notion of where to start. Sure, games throughout the ages had created tons of different variations on crowd control spells, and there were a bunch that I'd have to look into at some point. Having a charm spell that worked on animals, for instance, would be really useful. Or some kind of spell that inspired fear into our enemies. Making them retreat for a while would also be fine and dandy. Oh, and I suppose that sonic spells would also be able to perform some sort of minor earthquake that'd cause groups of enemies to stumble, slip, and fall all over the place. But what I was really looking for was one of the classics, a good old stun spell. I walked around by myself a bit, pondering exactly how to approach the spell. If I were able to figure this out by myself, then supposedly I'd also be able to learn new spells afterwards without Greg's help, which would make my life a hell of a lot easier. The near future looked very promising to me, and I couldn't keep from whistling as I was traversing the sun-dappled corner of the forest that Greg had encircled by a fence. A nearby brook was babbling happily away, and the grass-covered glade I was strolling across was so idyllic that I contemplated treating myself to a nap. A small crunch under my boot snapped me out of my reverie, and looking down, I could see a smattering of small bones. I had no idea how to identify what kind of animal they belonged to, as I still hadn't been able to summon the energy to actually learn all that stuff about following tracks, identifying animals by their droppings, and whatnot. That just wasn't my idea of a good time. Looking around, however, I started to get an idea as I could see countless such small piles around the glade, surrounded by bunnies hopping around happily. Only then did I realize that this was what Greg had been talking about when he talked about his training area. What I'd initially thought of as heaven was probably more of a pet cemetery. Ugh, morbid, I thought to myself, and then shrugged. But hey, when in Rome. I focused on a nearby rabbit and tried to wrap my mind around the spell I wanted to create. Any person nearby would have seen a thin half-elf walking around in circles muttering intensively to himself. In my mind, however, the discussion made tons of sense. All right, technical part first. I'm probably looking to make a sonic wave of sorts that overpowers the nervous system of my enemies, causing their body to lock up for a while. Basically, it should be similar to Sonic Wave, only with a stunning effect. Should I go for a full circle effect? Nah, Lyle probably wouldn't appreciate it if I hit him by accident. Better make it a cone of some sorts. Would be fun to see his face, though, mid-fight against an enemy, and then bzzz. Focus, Daniel. All right, cone it is. A wave straight from my position to lock up joints, cause cramps, and other hilarious effects. I should be able to maintain that effect in my mind. How about the sound? We're looking for something thunderous, overwhelming, and above all, shocking. The Barney theme song, perhaps? Nah, we're looking for the powerful kind of shock, not the nauseating type. The classics aren't my best bet for this, but how about some good old school rock and roll? That could probably work, and I've wasted enough time on Violin Hero that I know how to play a bunch of good stuff. AC/DC had some pretty amazing intros, and I bet I could catch at least some of their raspy guitar sounds on the violin, or at least make it sound like their songs. Dirty Deeds? Nah, too slow. Highway to Hell? No, same thing. Oh, I got it. I'll have to use the words of good old Goldilocks because this one is just right. A moment later, I had the spell image set in my mind and a poor, unsuspecting rabbit fixed in my sights. Oh, and I had checked that it wasn't some level 20 killer rabbit. This was the regular bunny type, otherwise known as target practice. The following moments introduced the world of chains to something similar to the intro to AC/DC's Back in Black, for what was probably the first time. The rabbit, however, ignored the epicness of the tones, and its fuzzy ears seemed to mock me as the attempt fizzled into nothingness. 20 minutes, and maybe 50 tries later, I enjoyed the sight as the spell slammed into being. A sort of floating haze reminiscent of a heat wave flew outwards from my position and moved through and past the unlucky rabbit, leaving it lying on the ground, twitching helplessly. I raised my hands, put on imaginary sunglasses, and told the rabbit, "You've been thunderstruck." The bunny didn't appreciate my wit, but after a short while of lying on the ground, it rose shakily to its feet and peeled off into the nearby bushes. Everyone's a critic, I mumbled to myself, and looked at the pop-up. Congratulations, You have learned a new spell, Stun Blast. You create a wave of force which is able to stun or severely reduce mobility of the target or targets for a while. Every skill point in Stun Blast will increase the chance that the enemy is stunned instead of debuffed. Properties: range 10 meters, cast time 1 second, effect width 90 degrees, duration 5 seconds, cooldown 30 seconds, mana cost 30, stat charisma. I did a quick little dance to celebrate my new spell. Alas, I did not receive any dancing skill for my efforts, likely a comment from Exogenics on my lack of skills, and went back to Grek to show off. When I found him, Grek was more than halfway through the second bottle and singing silly tongue-twister tunes in a very pleasant baritone, I might add. Before I realized it, my foot was tapping along to a rendition of The Nosy Gnome Knows No Naughty Nuns, and chuckling under my breath. I actually felt a bit of regret when I interrupted him. I didn't know how long he'd accommodate me as a teacher once the bottle was empty, and I still had one thing I wanted to know. Hey, Grek, I managed to learn another spell I was looking for. Before I forget, I just wanted to mention that your instructions have been really helpful, and I believe I'm feeling much better equipped for maybe living out the week than I was before today. So, thank you very much. He looked at me with a smile on his face and bleary eyes and waved a hand dismissively.
No need to mention it, kid. If you do manage to survive the next couple of years, you might even end up with a smidgen of talent. Now, I would say that you have maybe 20 minutes left of your time. So, is there anything else you need?
He held the remaining bottle up to the light and squinted as he estimated the remaining liquid. Actually, yes, there is one thing. With the basics you gave me and tons of practice, and maybe another lesson or two at some point, I do believe that I'll be able to learn a lot of the necessary spells to become a versatile bard. Still, it feels like I'm missing some of the basic skills. Some basic skills or knowledge I ought to have, but just haven't realized yet? Like maybe what the long-term focus for a bard might be? Grek scratched his head and glanced up at me, as if unsure what I was aiming for. I, of course, couldn't help, since I wasn't completely certain myself. I just felt like there was more to the bard role than monsters by day and music by night. He cleared his throat.
This I was not prepared to deal with today. Now, I want you to understand me completely. This is usually not one of the first lessons an apprentice bard asks for, and you are not prepared to enter that world. Generally, an apprentice bard will spend at least a couple of years playing, partying, getting acquainted with farmers' daughters, and getting themselves involved in foolish adventures. Some bards maintain that lifestyle for their entire life without digging deeper, and some are the happier for it. I can tell that you will not be satisfied with that simple life, but I cannot, in good conscience, involve you any further before you have grown a lot stronger. However, for showing a depth to you that I did not expect, I will teach you this basic skill that has helped me through a lot of difficult situations over the years.
He spent the next half hour teaching me the basics for how to successfully blackmail people, or how to best weather being blackmailed. I didn't know what the hell I was getting myself into, but that little lizard seemed to live one interesting life if he had to resort to blackmail often. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Blackmail. You are aware that there is an art form to blackmailing or being blackmailed, and many possible mistakes to make. Every skill point in blackmail will increase the potential for achieving a better result and avoid making errors when blackmailing, or increase the odds of catching the blackmailer in an error, or avoid unwanted results when being blackmailed. Stat: charisma. Once I had learned the skill, we started on our way back to the village. Oh, and my magic lore had increased by 2. Apparently, the information Greg had given me was good stuff. There was just the one thing I had to know before we came back. I've got to ask you one final question, Greg. We're in the middle of the forest with no one around, and you're not trying to fool anybody right now. You're standing differently. You're talking differently. Hell, even your eyes look different. What's with the drink? He looked down, considering the empty wine bottle for a moment with a small, sad smile playing on his lips.
The trick to a good long con, Arcangelo, and to the best performances as well,
He tossed the bottle into the nearby brush.
is when part of the performance is no performance at all.
We didn't talk much after that. Chapter 20. The Plot Thickeneth. When we returned to Grant's Crossing, we parted ways, and I was left without knowing what to do for the moment. My debuff from the fight with the dire rat was still in effect, hence I wasn't going to engage in any dangerous outings. I had a crucial decision to make for my crafting class, but my head was still spinning from all the new knowledge I absorbed from Grek and Chertog, and I wanted to, for once, make an informed decision. I took a look at my quest list to see whether there was something I could be doing to spend the time inside the town that didn't demand any heavy thinking. I scrolled down the list, muttering all the while. Let's see. Fighting. More fighting. Ugh. Too much thinking involved. Wait. I'd completely forgotten about that one. It's perfect. What's this feeling? The local priest, Mallard Bullhop, suffers from nightmares and premonitions. This infuses him with a vague feeling of dread, which he believes is tied to some local threat or enemy. Investigate further among the inhabitants of Grant's Crossing and discover whether there is something to his fears. Reward, 5 silver, 300 experience points, 500 reputation with Mallard Bullhop. That hit the spot. I mean, sure, the quest description did sound a bit dark and ominous, but I'd gotten to know the locals quite well by now, and judging by the reaction I'd initially gotten from Ethel, this was a recipe for strolling through the village, chatting with everybody, and getting bucket loads of gossip. Oh, and maybe an update to the quest at some point, if I got lucky. About an hour later had proven me entirely right. So far, I'd learned any number of interesting facts about the local priest. He did have trouble sleeping at night, but it was due to overeating and indulging in sweets before bedtime. He was one of the kindliest and most thoughtful villagers in Grant's Crossing, and always paid attention to the villagers' needs and well-being. He was also currently engaged in not-so-pastoral activities with no less than 3 local women, including the smith's wife. Oh, and he was secretly not a priest of Hara, the god of growth and nature's cycles, but Jarel, the goddess of the hunt and berserker rage. I actually found that last one more plausible than the sleeping around rumor, considering that Lawrence's wife was 1.85 meters tall and thin as a post, while Mallard Bullhop was well past middle-aged and even rounder than your average halfling. This lack of results didn't discourage me in the least, however. I was enjoying just chatting to people without anything pressing to do. Basically, so far I'd wandered around the village and talked to anybody who seemed to have some spare time. Amazing how a small village like this seemed to house gossip and stories enough for a large city. After my local lore skill had increased twice, I decided to change my tack a bit and try to talk with some of the business owners and ask them about any local threats in general instead of prying for gossip. This altered the results of my conversations quite a bit, and the resulting image that was starting to form was certainly more ominous than what I'd expected before starting the quest. After talking to Sourpuss, the carpenter, one of the half-orcs attending the crossing, and Herbert, Berthold's brother from the Blood Brothers, I was able to piece together that at least every 5th caravan failed to reach their destination, disappearing somewhere on the western side of the village. Apparently, the mayor had some communication spells that allowed them to converse with the big cities from time to time, keeping tabs on the caravans that were supposed to be arriving from the east or west. Adding all their comments up made for a disturbing and clear picture. Traveling through the Dawnlight Forest had always been dangerous, but trade had been dwindling for a long time now and was reaching an all-time low. Herbert had added that at one point, when trade was low and he had worked as a caravan guard, he had found an empty, bloodied boot near the road in a place where he knew that a caravan had been passing by a couple of days earlier. Sourpuss had also commented that people were starting to keep at home instead of making use of the nearby lands as they used to some degree. To me, it sounded like nobody had connected the dots so far and realized that the attacks were increasing. Nobody likes being the bearer of bad news, and that's why it was with a heavy heart that I trudged back to Mallard in the early afternoon. Of all the workplaces in Grant's Crossing, Mallard Bullhop had the most impressive one by far. The temple was placed right next to the lopsided town square and consisted of a largish circular area bounded by 4 towering monoliths. Except for the center of the area was covered in wild growth and at first glance seemed to be completely untended. Upon closer inspection, one couldn't help but notice that there was magic at play. The circle seemed to portray the 4 seasons, and if you stood in the middle and turned around slowly, you could experience the same flowers and bushes growing from almost nothing into full bloom before watching them slowly fading and withering again. The middle of the circle was held bare and occupied only by a slight circular depression set in stone where Mallard tended to be present during office hours, or whatever you're supposed to call it when there's neither office nor actual work involved. As per usual, he was puttering around the circle, caring for his plants, lost to everything but his tasks. I coughed and waited as he turned towards me with a kind smile on his face. I'm pretty sure that everybody has someone like Mallard among their families or acquaintances. That one person who always, whatever he's up to, just seems like this really, really nice guy. You might spend an entire evening with that person, and while you might not end up with the most groundbreaking or philosophic of discussions, you're dead certain to enjoy yourself because you just naturally relax in his or her company. Mallard was that favorite uncle times 20. Short of nature, he was well endowed in the stomach region, like most halflings are, and his most predominant feature by far was his facial hair, as he was completely bald yet sported the most impressive set of sideburns I'd ever seen, auburn red with large streaks of pure white interspersed. While Mallard seemed as content as ever, I couldn't fail to see the bags under his eyes. It looked like he still wasn't getting enough sleep, and now I knew why. He greeted me kindly.
"Ah, Arcangelo, it is so nice to find you in good health. How are you enjoying the beautiful weather we're having?"
We exchanged pleasantries for a bit, and not wanting to spoil his mood right away, I decided to use this opportunity to wise up regarding the goddess Saroon.
"Ah, Saroon, goddess of knowledge, pathways, and grudges, or the enigmatic scholar, as they call her,"
he said as his face brightened even more.
"Lovely girl, from what I've heard. Terribly preoccupied with her riddles, knowledge, and whatnot, but quite a pleasant acquaintance."
Feeling quite satisfied with his answer, I said, "Thanks, Mallard. That should be— Wait, knowledge and grudges? So she's a seeker of truth and a vengeful mistress? How does that work?" Mallard chuckled, which, with the amplitude of his belly, was a full body movement.
"Oh, you don't know a whole lot about gods, do you?"
He could probably tell from my expression that I was blanker than a 15-year-old kid on his first day working the register because he elaborated right away.
"We don't have any idealized gods here on Ion. A rhetorical question. How many people do you know who are good or evil through and through? Well, our gods reflect us, and we them. So, yes, Saroon is a dedicated explorer, scholar, and seeker of knowledge. But if you cross her, she will never forget it, and most likely make sure that you rue the day you learnt her name."
I had to admit that the idea of a god not being either black or white made a whole lot of sense to me. But still, I had to know. But how does that work with your god? Hurrah, the god of growth and nature, right? It doesn't get less evil than that, I'd say. This time his chuckle gave way to a full-bellied laugh, which went on for long enough that he had to wipe tears from his eyes before replying. First of all, if you believe that nature is good, per definition, then you really need to talk to a ranger or two. Second, Hurrah's full title is God of Growth and Nature's Cycles, which includes winter and death. At this, he pointed behind him at the withered portion of plants. I hung my head. God. Oh, I mean, damn. I feel silly. Well, thanks for clearing that up. Following that lecture, I couldn't come up with any excuses for postponing the inevitable, and I told Mallard what I had discovered concerning his nightmares. He took it in stride, actually seemed a bit relieved that it wasn't just his imagination playing tricks with him, thanked me for my help, paid me, and gave me a new quest. Congratulations, you have completed the quest, What's This Feeling? You have informed Mallard Bullhop that you believe there is a connection between his premonitions and the development in the disappearance of the caravans that pass through Grant's Crossing. Reward. You have received 300 experience points. Experience to next level, 300 out of 3,000. Your reputation with Mallard Bullhop has increased by 500. New reputation, 2,125. Liked. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 250. New reputation, 1,700. Liked. Items received, 5 silver. You have been offered a quest, Digging Deeper. Mallard Bullhop has tasked you with figuring out exactly what is impairing the trade through Grant's Crossing and why. Reward, 500 experience points. 1,000 reputation with Mallard Bullhop. 1 gold. Accept or decline. I was just about to leave when I realized that this was as good a time as any to advance one of my chronicler quests, and asked Mallard if he would be willing to tell me about the founding of the village, and briefly mentioned what Gilliam had told me earlier. He nodded amiably and launched straight into the retelling. You wouldn't know from looking at me, but I used to be a bit of a wild one back in my young days. Slim, too, believe it or not. Grant and I were the ones who'd originally stumbled on the crossing. We'd been accompanying a caravan on its way through the forest, and, to our advantage, the other persons on the caravan didn't see the same possibilities in the crossing that we did. They just saw an easier place to cross for the next hike through the forest. Grant knew Cassandra, who was working with her husband and kid in an inn, and I knew Otoria from an episode where I'd gotten myself into a bit of legal trouble. They all lived in Ligeria, west of the forest, and, while we were very different people, we had a couple of things in common. We were fairly young, unsatisfied with our lot in life, and not afraid of a challenge. We got everyone together and had a couple of late-night brainstorming sessions, plenty of alcohol involved for everyone, except for Otoria, which is probably for the best since she was the one to take notes and boil everything down to these huge to-do, to-buy, and to-talk-to lists. I won't bore you with the details, but Cassandra basically did all the shopping, Otoria handled all the official stuff, ensuring we had the rights to the land, that we'd be able to contact the authorities straight away when the village was founded, and legalities like that. And Grant spent some time learning about construction. Meanwhile, I mostly sat on my behind and congratulating myself on choosing the life of a wandering priest, since I didn't have anything to do until he arrived. The worst I had to deal with in those days was when tempers flared, and I had to put a stop to the bickering. For a while, we weren't too sure whether we could pull it off, but then, suddenly, we found ourselves on our way. Our initial journey was relatively uneventful. We managed to escape a tenacious harpy search party, but apart from that, we had no serious encounters. When we arrived, though, Mallard exhaled loudly before continuing. I'm not even sure how to properly explain the next month. To me, it's all one blurry mess of constant attacks by animals and monsters, minor and major injuries, poisonings and infections that needed cures, clerical and as well as mundane. And the exhaustion. Whew. Hurrah be my witness. Neither of us ever had time for a proper night's sleep, and I had to start creating some truly awful concoctions just to keep us all awake and functioning through the day. Ooh, and the bickering. I swear, if I hadn't lived it myself, I wouldn't have believed it. We were so put upon that the smallest spark could start an argument, and somehow I ended up being the only one who could usually quench the flames. Not always, though. The one time, Atari and Cassandra actually got into a fist fight over who ought to pull a night shift. I tried to fix that in my mind. The stately, respectful Atoria rolling around in the dirt pummeling another woman, and just failed. Clearly Mallard could see where my mind had gone off to, because he laughed and continued. Yeah, I know. Hard to believe, right? But that just shows what can happen to anybody when they're put through too much. Somehow, we endured, though. And I swear, the day we sent off the couriers was the happiest day of my life. That day, I firmly believed that Hurrah stood with me and that we'd be able to make it. And as you can see, we did. He ended that last bit with his arms folded over his prodigious stomach and a large, satisfied smile on his face. Quest updated. How the Crossing Came to Be. Chronicler Quest. You have learned a smattering of stories about the past of Grant's Crossing. The origin and creation of Grant's Crossing has never been officially chronicled. Compile the true story from the perspective of each of the 4 founders and reveal it to the village at Reveler's Moon. 2 of 4 stories obtained. I thanked him for the insight into his experiences and left. Moments later, I came to a decision and brought up the old pop-up that had been lying minimized in the periphery of my vision, accepting Saroon as my personal deity. If anything, she sounded like an interesting choice, and I could hardly wait to see what her path might offer. Of course, my subconscious was chanting, "I'm gonna be Indy," over and over again, but I told him to shut it and moved on. Glancing at the in-game clock, I could tell that it was only early afternoon, yet with all the learning and emotional roller coaster rides I'd been on since this morning, I was ready to call it quits and just forget about everything. But I still had 2 more quick visits to cross off the checklist for the day. Those were easily handled, however. First off, I made an arrangement with Herbert to visit the place where he had seen the ambush spot for a small fee. Thereafter, I agreed on the specifics with Lyle. We'd meet up outside the city gates all dressed up and ready for anything. Both were eager to agree. Lyle, because he seemed to be just as psyched as I was about improving our dynamic duo, and Herbert, because he seemed to be bored out of his mind. And that was it. I had nothing left to give. My mind felt numb from processing too much information, the inside of my head buzzing from too much talk. I stumbled back to the Warlock's End and told Gillum I'd be in my room for the rest of the day. Safely ensconced by myself, I felt like I could finally breathe. I slammed open the shutters and closed my eyes for a bit, just taking in the fresh air. After a bit, I got my violin and promptly lost myself in the music. Some people tend to believe that the process of creating music revolves around playing short passages over and over again with minor variations until you have it down pat. Hell, they may be right. I've never created any written pieces, and while I do know how to read and write sheet music, again, thanks to my old music teacher, I've never used it for anything more constructive than learning to play single pieces that caught my attention. My point being that when I create music, I tend to choose a certain mood and just let the music flow through me. In most cases, I wouldn't be able to reproduce anything I've played. Only on rare occasions do the songs stick with me afterwards. After the progress of the last few days, my mood was cautiously optimistic, and the music that sprang from my hands was light, floating, and flowing, gliding like a river, ever-changing yet happily bubbling away. I gladly lost any notion of time and place And only when I was disturbed from my trance by someone knocking on the door did I notice that my #1 fan was back. The lizard from before had relocated to a spot along my windowsill where it was apparently enjoying the music. Or at least, this is what I decided to believe. Its long spotted body was sprawled out, its eyes were closed, and it definitely seemed to enjoy life. I was a bit annoyed by the interruption, but decided to do the polite thing and answer the door. Outside, Gillum was waiting with an easy smile on his face. He told me that somebody had heard me playing for a while and wanted me to take it downstairs where everybody had a chance to enjoy it. I won't go over every little thing he said, but just to recap our discussion, Gillum argued that since I was playing anyway, I might as well have everybody else enjoy it, and he was persistent and convincing enough in his arguments that, in the end, I could only throw in the towel and yield. I did, however, throw a parting nod of apology to my current audience before I left, feeling only slightly silly for doing so. Even though I had a lingering suspicion that Gillum had only been able to convince me because he had a huge charisma score and a diplomacy skills stat that was through the roof, which, if true, would have some pretty damn interesting implications, it turns out that his arguments were right on the money. When I started playing again, I entered my own private world, population me and my music, and failed to notice anything else. Additionally, everybody seemed to understand my need for a bit of privacy, and no one intruded. Except for Gillum, who at some point put a pint and a steaming plate of tubers and veggies in front of me. One would think that 4 hours of almost constant playing would leave a body aching, the mind tired with having to concentrate on finger placement, how to keep the tune flowing, which tempo and pressure to apply. Not so for me. Playing has always been my therapy, my cigarette break, my haven. When at last, hours later, I lowered the violin from my chin with a sigh, I realized, to my surprise, that most people had already left and it was getting late. 4 people were left at one table, playing cards. Sourpuss sat alone at a table, hunched over a drink, and an elderly catfolk couple nodded to me and left when they saw that I had finished. I lowered the violin to its case and received yet another surprise. It was almost overflowing with coins of small denomination. A large stack of copper coins and even some silver were staring up at me. Evidently, people appreciated the constant background music even though there had been no interaction or singing whatsoever. Additionally, and at this final revelation, I gawked. My musician skill had risen 3 times. It would appear my teacher was right. Practice does pay off. While I was packing up, I spotted Ethel getting up from the players' table, laughing. He approached me, only to punch me hard in the kidney, say,
"Beautiful, my friend. Keep it up, you hear?"
and grin drunkenly at me. Rubbing my side, I glared at him, which was summarily ignored. He definitely reminded me of an old friend from high school who also believed that a sucker punch was the equivalent of a pat on the back. I did spot a chance to get an answer to something that had been bugging me since the last time we spoke. My reputation with Grant's Crossing had grown to liked status, and he seemed pretty inebriated. This was probably the best possible time to get some answers from Ethel, and even though I was tired from the long day, his earlier sad behavior just had side quest written all over it. I cleared my throat. Ethel, the other day you mentioned how we all have our regrets, and I failed to say it at the time, but if there's anything I can do, you just tell me, okay? He kicked my shin, ignoring my glare.
"Hey, it's appreciated, Archie. Ancient news, though, and nothing to do. My regrets."
He lowered his voice and leaned in.
"I'm not one to whine, but we aren't really treated that well around Ion. Rattlings, I mean. I've traveled around a lot as a scout and guard, and it's a fact. I left my hometown to find a place where I'd be better off and traveled for maybe 5 or 6 years searching. When I got here, well, I liked the place and got a decent job offer from Atoria. But on that topic, it was and is just the same as everywhere else. I don't regret settling down here, but You know, sometimes I wonder if I should have just stayed in my hometown to begin with.
Ouch. That was bitter. A little too much info for me. Maybe it would teach me not to pry too much. I hit him in the shoulder and told him that I, for one, liked him and didn't much care about the rest of the world. This seemed to do the trick, and a short while later he was back at the table drinking and laughing. A bit later, I was tucking myself in under my furs with that odd feeling you sometimes get after a day of hard work where you're completely done in and every bit of your body hurts. But it's a good kind of hurt. Only right then it was my brain that was stretching languorously from its efforts. Suddenly, I bolted upright in my bed, all sleep lost from my mind while everything I held to be true in the world came crashing down like boulders in the midst of an avalanche. All right, I was probably being a mite dramatic, but something had just changed for me, maybe in an irredeemable manner. I had not received any quest updates after turning in the quest. What did that mean? Had something broken inside the game? Was it something concerning this quest in particular? I went over the quest description and still couldn't find anything. It was a pretty straightforward chronicler quest. Wait! I facepalmed myself hard enough to leave a mark, and then pulled out my chronicler's journal. 5 minutes later, I'd chronicled the truth, for some reason my mind kept writing those two words as capital letters, about what happened on the day that Cassandra Drizzlefog died, taking painstaking care to write in the most succinct and informative manner while including the facts as to what I had learned, from which sources and what proof corroborated my story. The moment I was done and had closed the journal, I received the belated pop-up. Congratulations, you have completed the quest, Digging for Old Bones. Chronicler quest. You have managed to convince Gillum Drizzlefog of the truth of what happened to his mother years past. Reward. Chronicler skill gained plus increased to level 2. With this done, I sighed in relief and continued to enter the Chronicle of the Secrets inside the tavern desk, which awarded me a final pop-up. Congratulations, you have completed the quest, Unwrap the Gift. Chronicler quest. You have collaborated with Gillum Drizzlefog to divulge the past secrets that had been hidden inside his tavern desk for decades. Reward. Chronicler skill increased to level 3. Additional reward for the return of Gillum's mother's necklace. Photographic memory skill gained. For a second, I was looking for all the loot that always followed along with a quest completion, until I remembered all the goodies that Gillum had already lavished upon me. Also, the 2 new skills were sure to be entertaining, but that would have to wait till morning. I sighed in relief, dropping back into the bed, knowing that all was well and good in the world again. And off to the world of dreams I went. Chapter 21. There and Back Again. I woke the following morning before the in-game alarm clock woke me, feeling energized and ready to take on the world. I spouted to my room and the world in general, "Prepare, villains, lest ye feel the wrath of my mighty songs." Yeah, that still needed some work. I then remembered the 2 new skills I didn't have the mental capacity to check out in my somnolent state the night before, and quickly assessed the 2 latest pop-ups. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill, Chronicler. You have started down the path of truth and learning. Once you have dedicated yourself to the acquisition of lore, you will find that it's easier to learn something similar in the future. Every point to Chronicler increases the pace at which you learn new languages and the chance that your experience allows you to crack codes or notice inconsistencies in stories, among others. Stat: Intelligence. That was pretty awesome, actually. Well, apart from the name. The class skill for the Chronicler class was called Chronicler? Truly impressive naming, Exogenics. Kvoth would have been proud. Apart from the skill being lovely and promising an impressive increase in my future learning, it made quite a lot of sense to me. If you dedicated your life to mysteries and lore, you'd get better at spotting said mysteries and absorbing the lore. Also, the language part was a lovely detail. Usually you'd have to do a lengthy and tedious quest series with a group in order for them to consent to teaching you their language. That or buy a language primer at an exorbitant price. Being able to learn a language unassisted would be great. I'd have to ask Greg at some point regarding that book I found ages ago. If that was in the kobold language, I'd have to learn it eventually. My curiosity could accept no less. Now for the second pop-up. Congratulations! You have learned a new skill. Photographic memory. Running from monsters, breaking and entering, studying for a test? In many situations, you just don't have the time needed to study what you want. Once a day, you can take a snapshot of your current view and review it in detail for the following 24 hours. Cool down, 24 hours. I instantly loved the skill. Sure, I couldn't come up with a single instance where I could have used it so far, but that just meant that I lacked for imagination. I'd have to keep it close to mind in order to remember using it. Feeling like nothing could go wrong, I went down to the tavern room and was presented with what was on the menu that day. Oatmeal. My least favorite breakfast ever. To my surprise, the kitchen had cracked the code on how to make that horrifying and disgusting gruel taste all right. If you were wondering, the solution is loads of fresh herbs, salt, and a helping of crunchy bacon liberally mixed with the oatmeal. Thus revitalized with a full stomach and a nice +2 to endurance buff from the meal, I picked up the lunchbox I'd ordered earlier from Jeb, shouldered my backpack. Not literally, though. Exogenics were kind enough to allow for the inventory to just be there when you need it, so you didn't have to worry about all the trouble a physical backpack might entail. Putting it down somewhere and forgetting it, having your weapon tangle with the straps, or what have you. I then went to meet Lyle and Herbert at the gates. Both were already there when I arrived and raring to go. Lyle sported the new item he'd made from the iron in the mine and couldn't wait to show it off. An iron breastplate that sported a nice +8 armor class. It was a pretty basic item, really, but at the early levels, pickers can't be choosers. Most items that drop are horrible, and any solid item you equip can be felt right away. I held no doubt that just this one additional item could have turned the fight with the dire rat into less of a close call. Also, the fact that he was already able to craft this level of items was promising for the future. I congratulated him on his achievement, and off we went. Herbert was, well, Berthold had clearly not been lying when he said he'd cut off half his hair. His otherwise archetypal dwarven look, short, squat, and bearded, was extraordinarily martial due to one half of his head being recently shaved. I was expecting for the next part of our quest to be pretty boring, the three of us following the mud road that the locals called the trade route in wary silence, alert at all times for any sight or sound, but the truth turned out entirely different, yet pretty entertaining. Herbert showed himself to be something of a comedian and entertained the lot of us with gory, implausible stories about his adventures as a mercenary. If the mercenary life was as deadly as he implied, there wouldn't be any left at this rate. It did, however, allow for a lovely ride. And as he said, "We've never had any problems with the road for the first 3 or 4 hours. It's well-traveled enough that even the feral wildlife stays away." I didn't think anything of it, as it allowed us to relax and enjoy the day. After about 3 hours of walking at a leisurely pace, we paused for a long lunch where we regaled Herbert with the story of our rat battle. I intentionally downplayed my role in the battle, making it sound like Lyle had done the lion's share of the work. If, somehow, I could help rid Lyle of some of his insecurities, he'd likely be an even better help both in and out of battles. After lunch, we carried on, and about an hour later, both Lyle and I were engrossed in a story of how Herbert's entire mercenary company had suffered from indigestion, and they'd had to fight an entire battle armored only from the waist up. I could hardly concentrate on walking straight, I was laughing so much. Besides, there really wasn't anything else to focus on. The experience of the road had remained unchanged through the entire time. Only the local foliage differed. I had decided earlier that I really ought to learn a bit more about the local nature. To me, it was all small trees, large trees, and bushes that looked a bit like those other bushes earlier, only larger. In the current section, some large-leafed bushes had encroached upon the edges of the road on all sides, but everything else was the same bland, all green and brown scenery. Mid-sentence, Herbert stopped right in the middle of the road, turned towards us, and said, "All right, that should probably do it." Confused, I asked, "What? Should we start being alert from now on?" With a, for once, serious look on his face, Herbert responded, "Yeah, the first ambush spot is about half an hour away, and while I dinna think anybody'd attack the three of us, nothing to gain for them, I'd rather not tempt fate." From then on, we were markedly more alert, keeping an eye on our surroundings and trying not to make too much noise. A tense half-hour later, in the middle of a stretch that to me looked entirely like the rest of the forest, he told us that we'd arrived, and he'd give us a bit of time to decide whether we wanted to pay him and snoop around ourselves or return with him. Lyle and I spent a complete total of 2 minutes in the clearing before bumping heads. Slightly embarrassed, I asked Lyle, "So, have any idea what we're supposed to look for?" He just looked at me, completely crestfallen. I was sure you'd know how to proceed." Herbert wasn't any help either. "Do I look like some long-shanked elf hunter to you? This is what I use for a living," he said, patting the axe at his side. He grumbled, "You'd be better off asking someone who cares about those sorts of things, Ethel or Sourpuss or someone." The long walk back provided both of us with a lovely opportunity to consider the advantages of being prepared for the exact quest we were embarking on, and a reminder to myself that I really needed to learn some nature lore and something about tracking. Of course, I did get a good chance to consider how we should best proceed with our abysmally low tracking and nature skills, and when we neared Grant's Crossing again, I paid off Herbert and left the other two to find a person who'd be likely to be able to help us. My options were limited, though. I only really knew of 3 persons around who might be of any help. There was Sourpuss, who I'd already decided not to involve in anything dangerous if I could avoid it, Ethel, who was stuck guarding the village, and Navis Fenmorel, the elf druid who supposedly lived just outside town. A druid. That sounded like the exact type of person I was looking for, someone close to nature, who, when in doubt, could just ask the nearest squirrel for directions. Meeting Navis for the first time was an interesting experience. The first eye-opener was her dwelling. I had imagined her living close to nature, in a tent enclosed by trees or maybe even in a tree, but the reality was even grander than I had anticipated. At first, when I arrived at the appointed spot, 10 minutes walk north of Grant's Crossing, a stone's throw from the jagged rush, I wasn't even able to spot her dwelling. Right until I heard a song babbling from in between a gathering of 3 stout oak trees, old and large enough to have grown into one melded behemoth of a tree. Babbling was the only word that suited, seeing as how it was a hodgepodge of words interspersed with no apparent meaning. The melody was light-hearted and catchy, though, and I found myself humming along to the tune. The gnarled limbs of the oaks beckoned me further into the center of the huge tree, where the afternoon sun only broke through intermittently, and my eyes had to adjust for a bit before I realized what I was looking at. If one were to imagine the countless roots of 3 huge, age-old oaks working together in unison in order to dig down into the ground and push all the earth back, finally settling in order to serve as walls, floor, and even a friggin' pathway down. This is exactly what Navis's home was. There was no such thing as a plain surface. Everything looked to be wavy and undulating, and the effect was actually pretty disturbing to the eye. Until you'd put eyes on Navis. Neither she nor her home in any way diminished the chaotic visual effect of the room, but one look at her, sitting cross-legged on a pillow, bouncing carelessly back and forth while sewing a shirt, And suddenly, everything seemed all right. Every single thing in its element. The best word I can think of to define Navis would be bouncy. This does not contain any carnal implications. If anything, Navis was petite for an elf. Everything else, though, her red blonde hair, which always seemed to move about her face like a halo, her energy, which seemed to spark all over the place, and, of course, her personality, which was radiant and completely erratic. Within the first couple of minutes inside her abode, she'd hugged me — I am not a hugger — berated me for not showing up earlier, and browbeaten me into playing along with her little ditty because she wanted to get it right. To this day, I still don't know how she knew who I was, but she was chatting away right off the bat like we'd known each other forever. And, well, she was just so enthusiastic that I couldn't do anything but play along. I would have called her ditzy, but from time to time, her comments were so insightful that they revealed a razor-sharp mind behind the curls. Maybe I was just way too slow to keep up with the tempo at which her brain operated. After half an hour of playing, singing, and her telling me an extremely convoluted story about the wild piglet family that was living close to home, I finally got around to asking her whether she'd be willing to help me with my problems. Her response was sympathetic, but firmly opposed.
I am of the forest, this is true, Archangelo. My heart goes out to your plight and that of my villagers, but my place is here.
This was the most lucid response I got out of her. Never got a real reason. I was scratching my head, contemplating my next move, when I suddenly noticed that Navis had moved. Silent as a ghost, until she was standing right in front of me, her animated face tipped to the side adorned with a pensive smile. I barely had time to start noticing how pretty she was before she reached with one hand for my face and patted my chin like you would a good kid.
You're all right,
she determined with a nod for herself.
Especially considering your parentage. You half-elves have a tendency to go bad, like a litter with a stunted cub, but you'll do just fine. You need to see my dear friend Daria.
She lifted a finger, admonishing.
Now, pay attention. Just like you, she is a reborn, but that is where the similarities stop. You are of the people, and she is not. This is why you have to treat her well. Any low behavior, and I will hear of it. Understood?
Confused, I just nodded, and her face cleared right up. She continued.
Good. She will help you, but you might have to prod her along a bit. It will be good for her to get out among people.
She then proceeded to explain where Daria was sheltered, and moments later moved right on to asking me which other instruments I could play. When I finally disentangled myself from Navis's curious questions, it was already getting late. Dusk was approaching, and it was getting harder to see where I was going. Her directions were good, though, and even someone with limited botanical knowledge like me would be able to find her camp. I knew I was approaching when I could tell that the underbrush was slowly opening up, and I could glimpse the telltale gleam of a campfire straight ahead. I was already busy mentally preparing my arguments for why the other players should help me in my quests, and inside my own head this remains a completely valid excuse for why I failed to notice her approach right up until the moment where she was aiming an arrow at my exposed back and clearing her throat. I don't squeal. I would, however, be lying if I tried to claim that the noise I produced at the shock of a tall, feral-looking woman aiming an arrow straight at me wasn't slightly high-pitched. It probably didn't help that she had light green skin and huge tusks, and that her multicolored leather outfit seemed to make her blend right in with her surroundings. My obvious distress seemed to help convey the fact that I came in peaceful intentions, because she aimed her bow slightly to the side, snorted, and said,
5 steps forward sets off a noise alarm, so don't. Why are you here?
Navis told me where you camped. She wasn't sure whether you'd help me, but said you'd probably be willing to hear me out. At this, she lowered her weapon and moved at an angle towards the campfire. I shrugged and followed her. A moment later, I was met by the impressive benefits of someone who had chosen the Scout crafting class. The small clearing I entered had clearly been altered for the optimal comfort of the half-orc, as well as for security. The central cooking fire was dug into the ground, reducing the light emanating from the fire, and it was entirely smokeless, however that was possible. I could also tell that a couple of screens woven from sticks and plants had been placed in random openings around the clearing, although their use was lost to me. The half-orc lowered herself to a cloth tarpaulin placed on the ground in front of a cozy-looking lean-to and started whittling away at a piece of wood, one out of a larger pile in front of her. She eyed me briefly and said,
"So, talk."
Ignoring her behavior, I complied. I told her about the entire threat to the village, the quest from the priest, why we didn't want to include Sourpuss, and what the result might be for the village if nothing was done. I left out nothing, painting the entire vivid picture of a village in decline due to an unknown external threat. When I was done, the silence stretched as she kept sharpening the small piece of wood, apparently lost in thought. Finally, she lowered the piece of wood, now transformed to a wooden caltrop, to the ground with a sigh and looked straight at me, her dark eyes piercing and hard.
"I don't like people. That's pretty harsh, but it's a fact. And you,"
she indicated her knife at me,
"are a prime example of why this is the case. How many minutes did you manage to spend in Grant's Crossing before you started insulting the mayor of all people? Never mind, that was a rhetorical question. But this is why I entered World of Chains in the first place, and very much why I arrived in Grant's Crossing later on. It has provided me with the chance to enjoy myself and nature without the nuisance of having to interact with other reborn all the time. There is only one thing I didn't expect. I've actually come to like the local people. Most of them are basically good folks in a tough spot, and never mind. What I'm trying to say is, yes, I'll help you. But I want you to understand me right. I'm not joining you for the questing or leveling or whatever. We're helping the village, and then we go our separate ways."
That was pretty harsh, but hey, I couldn't exactly fault her logic. Also, a lot of players really did act like complete morons inside World of Chains, so we were almost in agreement there. I didn't waste any time trying to convince her that I wasn't like all the others or any such nonsense. Either she'd come around or she wouldn't. Whatever happened, I'd found someone who would have a chance of helping Lyle and me track down whoever was attacking the caravans, and so I might be able to progress with my quest, and of course help the village while I was at it. I encouraged her to talk to Mallard so she could receive the quest as well, but she turned me down, saying,
"I'm not in it for the rewards."
Or words to that effect. The whole thing felt subtly wrong to me. Who'd turn down a reward for a job you were aiming to do anyway? Puzzled, I thanked her for agreeing to the assistance of the village and left. When I returned to the Warlock's End, dusk had fallen over the village, and I was tired, sweaty, and grumpy. I decided to forego any bardish activities for the evening and just enjoy myself. After a pint of lemon ale and a great meal, a thick haunch of baked bread carved out in the middle and stuffed with bell peppers and mushrooms, the dominant part of dissatisfaction at wasting almost an entire day trudging along a forest path had faded away, and I was just relaxing and taking in what was happening around the tavern room. In a corner, a bunch of kids had assembled a pile of chairs into something resembling a fort and were playing a game involving a lot of arguing and pointing fingers. The rest of the room was relatively calm, and I naturally gravitated towards a table where Gillum was playing a card game with two others I didn't know, a female half-elf and a male ratling. The banter was good-natured and relaxed, and they were playing for low stakes, coppers only. They didn't mind me pulling up a chair, and once introductions were made, I tried to get a feel for the game. Fingers, as it was called. Fortunately, the suits were as I knew them. 52 cards, 2 to 10, jack, queen, king, and aces high. No jokers. The game itself was roughly equivalent to poker, but that's about as far as my understanding went, as the players had another meta game going on, involving, unsurprisingly, given the name, the fingers of one hand while the other hand held the cards. The evening flew by, and I got to know the other players. Millard the Rattling did some part-time work for a lot of shop owners of the city and was animated, fun, and seemed to be a bit of a layabout. Aurora, the half-elf, had a pleasant but really focused personality, and apparently helped the entire village gathering and farming herbs. Win or lose, she was entirely gripped by the game. I lost more than I won. A lot more, close to 4 silver, and drank a bit more than I should have, but I wholeheartedly enjoyed just loosening up and enjoying myself with no other thoughts crowding my mind. I did learn a lot, though, even though I wasn't actively trying to. Fingers, for one, was a riveting game that contained way more skills and theory than I possessed at the moment, and just like a regular game of Texas Hold'em, it was pretty addictive, and with a lively group like ours, a whole lot of fun. I ended up gaining close to 3 levels in gambling, and still didn't feel remotely close to mastering the basics of Fingers. I also, at long last, got an answer to a question that had been rummaging around the back of my mind for a while now. Where the hell does all the money in Grant's Crossing come from? Decent tips, quest rewards, and so on. How does it work? Honestly, I was expecting the answer to be, it's a game. Economics doesn't have to make sense. But the truth was a bit more straightforward. For day-to-day stuff inside the village, most transactions took place by the means of bartering or the exchange of services, with no money changing hands. But for larger transactions or purchases, they used money. The major inflow of money invariably came from the regular caravans. When they passed the night, or a couple of nights, they'd already spent at least 2 weeks traveling on foot, and would be more than willing to part with some of their money for services, entertainment, or purchases. Apart from the regular trade passing from the eastern side of the Dawnlight Forest and vice versa, the caravans typically earned a little extra on the side from people like Aurora, who from time to time sold herbs and plants on the cheap to the caravans. Also, it turns out that Mrs. Bertinga did brisk business with the townsfolk of Grant's Crossing, and was willing to pay for most kinds of produce, which she'd then barter for and then sell them off with a healthy profit margin for herself, undoubtedly. In conclusion, cash was not king, nor was it always available, but all in all, the average townsperson had plenty of opportunities to earn money and not too many places to spend it, which meant that there was a small surplus of cash flowing around. Oh, and the lovely folks at the table got a good laugh at my expense for asking why they didn't just use portals for trade. Apparently, the ingredients needed for powering the portals were pretty damn costly, and they were only used to transport newly fledged reborn away from the village because the alternative, a bunch of disgruntled reborn stuck in a village they disliked, had proven even more costly. I also had a chance to see Sourpuss in a less sour state. He'd been seated in a corner by himself, but late in the evening, he dragged his chair next to mine, laid a heavy arm over my shoulder, and, in a gruff manner, started extolling my virtues and ridding the village of the feral cats. His breath was truly horrible, and when I thanked him for the compliments, I discovered why, as he sloppily poured half the contents of his tankard into my mug and offered a toast in what could only be called foul rotgut. He retired to his own table shortly thereafter, but it was nice to see this side of him, if only briefly. When at last I retired to my chambers, my execution of the evening serenade was pretty sketchy, but I'm pretty sure it was at least loud enough that the next-door neighbors had a chance to enjoy my heartfelt enjoyment of the Ace of Spades. No skill-ups, though. Tough crowd. Chapter 22. Into the Wilds. I've always disliked the term bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. How can people not be aware that the average squirrel, to whom the term supposedly applies, sleeps almost 15 hours a day? Anyway, we met way too early the following morning. This was not because I particularly liked getting up early, but we'd agreed that it was necessary in order to avoid a situation where we started late, and suddenly we'd be running around in the woods in near darkness in an area where an unknown number of caravans had been attacked and supposedly slaughtered. Hence, we met before the gates, around 6 in the morning, and while the others looked like they were raring to go, My eyes felt gritty, and my tail felt pretty damn heavy. We knew from the day before that we'd have to spend the next approximately 5 hours walking, and I'd decided to spend the time trying to soften up Daria. Even though she seemed like a bit of a hard case, being on bad terms with the only other PC nearby was sheer idiocy. For this purpose, I utilized my secret weapon, Lyle. One whispered conversation with Lyle, and we'd agreed on a course to bring Daria out of her shell a little. Personally, I was counting on the youthful curiosity and bumbling charisma of Lyle to win through where I'd obviously failed, and then perhaps use that in order to get an in. A short while into our trek, I was looking back at the walk with Herbert with a feeling bordering on nostalgia. Unsurprisingly, Daria was not fond of small talk and seemed quite satisfied passing the entire walk in silence. She did, however, respond civilly to Lyle's questions, and when he innocently proclaimed how he'd almost never left the village before, Daria turned out to be a fount of knowledge on the surrounding environs, and Lyle listened intently, as did I. Apparently, Grant's Crossing was placed fortuitously from a defensive point of view. The jagged rush bordered the village all along the eastern side of the village, and a couple of kilometers north of the village it divided further, running north and west, respectively. As the jagged rush was virtually impassable by ordinary means, this left the village in a corner of the map and surrounded by pine forest with no large communities or groupings of natural predators or enemies nearby. This, apparently, was something of a rarity inside the Dawnlight Forest, which was seen as a dangerous and relatively lawless area. This was not to say, however, that the western shore of the jagged rush held no dangerous animals or abominations. A nearby marsh area held a large population of dangerous vipers and reptiles. The Green Peaks, about a day's travel away, were said to have a small harpy population, and of course, regular hostile animals were abundant, as I'd already established for myself. But within 3 days of travel, there was only one large sentient grouping, a tribe of kobolds, with which Grant's Crossing maintained a tentative state of peace, heavily influenced by the fact that the tribe remained on the eastern side of the jagged rush. Through my myriad of conversations with various village people over this and that, I'd already learned most of this. But the point was to get her talking, and it worked like a charm. Once Daria had finished her exposition, she spent a short while lost in thought, until suddenly she blurted out,
I can't believe that you didn't know that.
Lyle's face blossomed to a fantastic red, and he shrugged, clearly ill at ease. Well, I knew some of it, but, my folks didn't want me to leave the village anyway, so it's never really come up. I chimed in at this point. With no school in the village, it seems that the education of the young people is fairly random. Lyle knows so much about history and smithing that I've lost all hope of ever catching up to him, but there are a few areas that have been neglected pretty badly. I've tried to teach him a bit about the stuff I know something about, how to spot an enemy, tactics, and so on, but there are a couple of areas where I know even less than Lyle. Geography's one of them, and the other, well... I turned to Lyle, indicating our surroundings. I'm from the big city. Personally, I can tell that these trees are spruce, but apart from that, I don't believe that I'd be able to name any of the bushes, plants, or trees around here, let alone recognize them if we returned here a bit later. Daria looked at me with a blank expression, verging on disbelief, and I asked Lyle, "How about you?" Lyle just silently shook his head in denial, and I turned back towards Daria in time to see the disbelief plain on her face. Yeah, it's a disgrace, really. Neither of us have had a chance to learn anything much about nature in our lives, and, we probably shouldn't be allowed outside Grant's Crossing without a chaperone telling us what's poisoned and what isn't. She gave me a flat look and said in a dull monotone,
You could just ask.
My brow furrowed, and I asked, confused, What do you mean?
There's a difference between disliking company and being socially challenged. Clearly, you really want me to teach you some nature lore, and you could have just asked. Instead, you had to put on that show and try to guilt me into doing it.
She scoffed and started walking faster. I cursed silently and spoke to her admittedly shapely behind. Sorry, I just thought, would you be so kind as to teach Lyle and me about nature lore on the walk? Daria growled.
Oh, Pitts, no.
And turned around, flashing me a smile that was all teeth and tusks.
But I don't mind teaching Lyle.
That's how the rest of the hike passed by. Lyle and Daria walked, heads together, while Daria exposited on the names, properties, and typical behavior or placement of a certain plant, or at least that's what I assume, since Daria would cut off and glare at me the instant I moved too close to them. I spent most of the time annoyed at myself and at the fact that I was no closer to figuring Daria out than when I started. If anything, I'd alienated her even further. I definitely also spent way too much time mulling over what her deal was. She was one tough green cookie to figure out. She was, admittedly, also very pretty, once you saw past the huge tusks. She was a tall, slender woman with an athletic and strong build. Her high cheekbones and long hair made up in a multitude of braids, all combined to give her a certain air of someone primal yet controlled. After a while, I had to admit to myself that I was procrastinating and had really just gotten what I deserved, so I forced my thoughts to other endeavors. And, well, it was really rather enjoyable. The day was chilly but clear, and the sun was out. It proved a great backdrop for taking stock and doing a bit of mental accounting, sorting out which tasks and mysteries I still hadn't solved, which ones were still outstanding, and which ones I wouldn't mind skipping entirely. There weren't that many days to go before I had received the option to jump ship for greener pastures through a portal. While there was no need to leave right away, well, odds were that life would be easier for someone like me in the big city. Once I'd done all the mental arithmetic, I ended up with a grand total of 3 quests that I'd really hate missing out on. The rest of them didn't seem that impressive, judging only from their description, and while I was very well aware that looks could be deceiving in the world of chains, I probably wouldn't be playing the good old wonder what might have happened if I stayed game if I skipped town. For instance, checking a still in the wilderness? Kudos for the Fallout 2 reference, but no thanks. The most important quest for me was the one concerning that damn door. A door, placed in the middle of nowhere along with Chertog's story about being sentenced to some sort of punitive guard duty or the like, pretty much had me drooling. And I needed to know what was behind it. A growing evil? Dragons? Levels upon levels filled with a thriving civilization of goblin-like creatures that I could abuse as fodder to increase my level to superhuman status? There was also the one where I was supposed to convince Lyle's father that Lyle was in good hands. Yeah, that's not gonna happen, I thought. I wouldn't mind taking Lyle with me to the big city as some sort of holy bodyguard/trainee, but the odds of that happening were bad, as protective as his parents were. I'd probably end up having to ditch Lyle completely, but I'd cross that sorry bridge if I came to it. The last one? That quest where I was supposed to play for the villagers 3 nights a week with an unknown time limit. Yeah, that one ought to have a great reward, but without knowing when I'd earned my reward, I might just have to grind my teeth and skip it entirely. The very last item on my to-do list wasn't a quest, though. It was that book in an unknown language I'd just kept forgetting about. I'd seriously have to ask Greg about it. I'd be so pissed if I ended up leaving the village behind before realizing it was the key to something amazing here in the forest. Sure, there were a couple of other non-quest items I needed to get sorted out as well. Finally, and once and for all, deciding if tinkering was the way to go for me, for instance, and learning a bit more about spells from Greg. We took a short lunch break and ended up back in the clearing that Herbert had pointed out shortly before noon. Good thing, because I'd more or less exhausted all topics I wanted to procrastinate on. Next, I'd be starting in on what the mobsters were up to out in the real world, and I really didn't want to get my mind whirling in circles on that subject. Lyle and I were just waiting for Daria, who seemed to be lost in her own world. After a bit, she apparently came to a conclusion because she whirled on us, challenging.
All right, playtime is over.
Her gaze drifted over to me.
And we're done with the childish punishments for today. So, you two have little to no idea how to track a target, animal or otherwise, right?
I shrugged. Inside a city, I know a bit about it, sure. I'd actually been pretty proficient at tracking down people in cities when I was playing a rogue. More a question of asking the right questions of the right persons and knowing your districts than actual tracking. Out here, though, I'm as ignorant as dirt. Lyle looked down and said, The same, I guess, except I don't know anything about cities either. Daria nodded.
All right, I can work with that. So, how do you think tracking in the forest works?
I instantly felt relegated back to school, being called before the blackboard by the teacher. Then, as now, my thought processes seemed to rapidly leak out my ears, leaving only a remnant of my usual wit. Footprints, I guess. And if the bandits have marked some trees to remember their way, maybe? Lyle chimed in.
In all the stories, the heroes usually find something the villains have dropped. Or maybe a hair or a thread gets stuck on a thorny bush or something. So we keep our eyes open for something like that?
She smiled slightly at that, not unkindly.
That's actually not a bad starting point. Not because either of you are right, really, but because there's not a whole lot you'll have to unlearn. You,
She nodded at me.
do have a point in that you'll generally be on the lookout for footprints, except they're a tricky business at best, and we've had at least 3 solid rainfalls since the last 2 weeks. The rest of your guesses belong where you found them, Lyle, in the stories. In real life, part of your cape doesn't just get left on an annoying thorn, and you don't just drop your knife. That would make our work way too easy.
She raised an admonishing finger.
And it is hard work, make no mistake. Tracking is the combined sum of your perception, intuition, knowledge of your surroundings, and perseverance.
She walked to the edge of the path, sat down on her haunches, and pointed at the forest.
Now, let's get to it.
The next hour was spent moving extremely slowly through the woods, receiving instructions on which signs we were supposed to look for if we were tracking animals, different animal types, how to track humanoids, and a smattering of different monsters. We covered when to do grid searches and when to track in an expanding spiral pattern. Daria also expanded on the importance of knowing your nature lore. Some plants could aid you in your tracking endeavors. For instance, they might hold branches that broke off easily, leaving a trail of clearly broken or discolored branches, or they might shed their leaves with little force, leaving a partially defoliated plant as a result. One specific plant she named Runner's Foe would even wither and die at the touch of bare skin, animal or humanoid alike. Others again would make your job more difficult with branches that were supremely flexible or broke imperceptibly, leaving no trail of your quarry's passing. There was no doubt that Daria knew her trade. She exposed self-assuredly with plenty of practical examples and no hesitation, and as long as we were in the midst of a topic she obviously enjoyed, her animosity towards me was temporarily buried. While I did by no means absorb everything she taught us, I did pick up a lot of information, and especially took one thing to heart, namely that the art of tracking, her words, not mine, was the exact same for the pursuer and pursued. And while I did not expect to spend a lot of time mid-forest tracking my enemies, a guy in my real-life situation might do well to learn any tricks that could help him avoid pursuit, and learn I did. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill: tracking. Whether you are hunting down your prey or maybe you are the prey attempting to avoid pursuit, this skill helps you make the most of your surroundings. Every skill point in tracking or one of its subcategories will increase the chance of either noticing any perceptible tracks or clues or avoiding leaving any tracks for your pursuer to find. Stat: Perception. Congratulations, you have learned a new subskill to tracking. Tracking forest. You have learned new information about tracking or avoiding being tracked inside forests. Every skill point in your subskill will increase the possibility of success and will also increase the main tracking skill, albeit slowly. Stat: Perception. The subskill had just managed to improve to 3, and I was starting to fear for the time we'd have to spend in the woods when Daria stopped unexpectedly in front of a huge thorny bush and gave a soft,
Huh.
She then turned to us with a slight frown.
Regardless of everything I've said earlier, some rare few times you just get everything handed to you on a silver platter.
She indicated the bush, where a clear and straight path had been trampled through the bush, leaving no doubt that someone or something had passed through here. Daria confirmed that she was not able to ascertain what type of creature or humanoid had been moving here, but she could say that there had been several of them, and at least one of them had been of her height. Checking in the opposite direction, whoever had made the trail had shown an equal lack of care back there. I took a gander at my map, and a quick estimation had the trail leading straight back to the trade route, only a kilometer or so down the road from where we'd started tracking. Now, we had already been moving fully equipped and ready for action, but seeing how we were getting somewhere, we were fully focused, weapons and, yes, musical instruments primed and ready. By agreement, Daria led the group, keeping an eye on the trail, closely followed by Lyle, who stayed ready to move up front if we were attacked. An eventless half-hour later found us crouching in the foliage, staring into a large clearing containing a city. All right, it wasn't a city, not even a village. It looked more like a grouping of about 20 low-roofed, dilapidated buildings that had been left alone for years. But still, neither of us had heard any mentions of anybody ever living out this way. Yet the evidence was clear, and the tracks, according to Daria, clearly continued into the center of the ruins.